The wind came early that year. September should have meant harvest warmth, the kind that made wheat fields shimmer gold under an honest sun. Instead, it brought the first bite of winter, sharp, mean, and 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Eliza Thornfield felt it through the gaps in the schoolhouse walls, watched it scatter her students' papers across the warped floorboards, saw it in the worried glances parents exchanged when they picked up their children. She'd learned to read weather the way some women read tea leaves. 5 years on the frontier taught you that much, or killed you trying. Miss Thornfield? Young Sarah Beckham stood at her desk, slate in hand, eyes too knowing for 8 years old. Papa says we might not come back after this week. Eliza kept her voice steady. Why's that? Says if the snow comes like last year, the pass will close. Says it ain't worth risking for letters and sums when there's cattle to bring down. The other children had already fled, their boots thundering across the porch in a stampede of relief. Fridays always felt like parole. Sarah lingered, though, she usually did, smart as a whip and hungry for more than this hardscrabble life would likely offer. You keep practicing your reading, Eliza said, pressing a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe into the girl's hands. Don't let winter steal that from you. Sarah's face lit up, then dimmed just as quick. Mama says reading's fine for ladies in cities. Says out here it just makes you discontent. Maybe. Eliza walked her to the door. Or maybe it reminds you there's more to being alive than just surviving. She watched Sarah run toward the wagon where her father waited, that book clutched against her chest like a treasure. David Beckham tipped his hat to Eliza, polite, distant, the way most men treated her now. Respectful enough, but with that edge of pity reserved for women who'd somehow failed at the fundamental task of securing a husband. 28 years old, unmarried, teaching other people's children while producing none of her own. In Boston, that might have marked her as independent, even admirable. Out here, it just made her an oddity. A problem without a solution. The schoolhouse emptied into silence. Eliza swept the floor, banked the stove, tried not to calculate how many weeks of fuel she had left. The territorial government paid her salary 3 months late, when they paid at all. She'd stretched last month's payment so thin it was barely there anymore. Potatoes and flour, coffee that was more grounds than bean, meat only when someone paid her in kind. She locked the door against the wind and started the walk home. Home was generous. A soddy built into the hillside, 14 feet by 12, with a roof that leaked ambition every time it rained. The previous teacher had died there. Pneumonia, they said, though Eliza suspected it was more like hope finally giving out. When she'd arrived from Philadelphia 5 years ago, fresh from normal school and full of reformist zeal, she'd thought it temporary. A year, maybe 2, saving money before moving somewhere with actual opportunities. The frontier had a way of making liars out of plans. She was halfway there when she noticed the horse. Big bay gelding, cavalry build, tied to the post outside McCreary's general store. Not unusual, plenty of riders came through Cedar Bluff, but something about this one made her slow her steps. Maybe the quality of the tack or the way the horse stood, patient, disciplined, like it was used to waiting while violence happened elsewhere. The door opened. A man stepped out. Tall didn't cover it. He moved like a storm front, all presence and pressure. 6 foot something of weathered leather and trail dust, hat pulled low enough to hide most of his face. But she caught the jawline, sharp enough to split kindling, and the set of his shoulders. This was someone who'd spent time carrying weight that wasn't physical. He glanced her direction, stopped. For a moment, they just looked at each other across 30 feet of rutted street. His eyes were dark, brown maybe, or something deeper, and completely unreadable. Then he touched the brim of his hat, the gesture somehow both courteous and dismissive, and swung into the saddle with the ease of a man who lived there. He rode north toward the high country. Eliza stood there longer than she should have, watching him disappear into the aspens. Then she shook herself and kept walking. Ridiculous, getting distracted by a stranger. She had real problems, like the fact that her last bag of flour had more weevils than wheat, and winter was coming whether she was ready or not. The soddy was cold. It was always cold. She lit the stove with hands that shook more than they used to, got coffee going from yesterday's grounds, tried not to think about the fact that she'd had the same conversation with herself every night for 2 months now. You can't make it through another winter alone. She'd managed last year, barely. Snowed in for 6 weeks straight, burning furniture when the firewood ran out, melting snow for water when the well froze. She'd lost 15 pounds she couldn't afford to lose and developed a cough that still hadn't completely left. This year would be worse. She could feel it in her bones, in the way the wind already had teeth. There was always Aunt Margaret in Philadelphia. She'd written twice, offering a place to stay if Eliza would just admit this grand experiment had run its course. The letters sat in the drawer where Eliza kept things she couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't quite throw away. Going back would mean admitting defeat. It would mean becoming exactly what everyone expected, another woman who'd tried independence and found it wanting. She drank her coffee black, staring at the wall. The knock came just after sunset. Eliza nearly dropped her cup. Nobody visited. The respectable women of Cedar Bluff had given up trying to befriend her after the first year. She didn't fit their prayer circles, and quilting bees didn't perform the right kind of gratitude for their charity. The men kept their distance for different reasons. An unmarried woman living alone was either pitiable or dangerous, depending on who you asked. She opened the door with her hand on the knife she kept tucked in her apron. The man from town stood on her threshold. Up close, he was even more imposing. Not just tall, solid, like something carved from bedrock and taught to walk upright. His face was all hard angles and old scars, the kind earned from living rough. Maybe 40, maybe older. Hard to tell when the sun had burned away anything soft. Miss Thornfield. His voice matched the rest of him, low, controlled, with a roughness that suggested he didn't waste it on small talk. You have me at a disadvantage, Mr. Callahan. Rourke Callahan. The name meant nothing to her. She waited. He looked uncomfortable, which was interesting. Men this size usually wore confidence like armor. Might I come in? What I've got to say isn't for the street. Every instinct screamed no. You didn't invite strange men into your home after dark, especially not men who looked like they'd been intimate with violence. But something in his expression, not threat, but something closer to desperation, carefully controlled, made her step aside. He had to duck through the doorway. The Saudi seemed to shrink around him. Coffee? Eliza asked, because manners were the last defense of civilization. No, thank you. He took off his hat, held it in both hands. Buying time. I'll be direct, Miss Thornfield. I've come to make you an offer. I'm not interested in marriage. The word hung there like a gunshot. Eliza's laugh came out sharp, almost mean. You're joking. No, ma'am. You don't even know me. I know enough. He met her eyes steadily. Know you've been teaching here 5 years. Know you're educated, resourceful, not prone to hysterics. Know you're alone and winter's coming and your situation isn't going to improve. Heat flooded her face, anger and humiliation in equal measure. How dare you? I'm not trying to insult you. His jaw tightened. I'm trying to offer you a solution. To a problem you know nothing about. Don't I? Something flickered in his expression. Not cruelty, but close. I know what it's like to be running out of options, Miss Thornfield. I know what it sounds like when a door's about to close and there's no opening it again. She should have thrown him out, should have been furious. But underneath the outrage was something worse, recognition. Because he was right. She was running out of options, and they both knew it. Why? The question came out quieter than she intended. He was silent for a moment, looking at his hat like it might have answers. I've got 300 acres in the High Valley. Good land, decent water, cattle that'll winter if they're managed right. I've got a house that's solid, actual wood, not sod, roof that doesn't leak. That's not what I asked. His eyes came up. I need a wife. Why me? Surely there are women in town who'd... I don't want someone from town. Something cold crept into his voice. I don't want someone with family nearby, or friends who'll visit, or a church congregation watching every move. I want someone who understands what it means to survive alone. There it was, the truth underneath the offer. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a partner in isolation, someone who wouldn't ask questions or expect things he couldn't give. What exactly are you offering? Eliza kept her voice level. Roof over your head, food on the table, protection. He paused. Separate rooms, if that's your concern. I'm not asking for... I'm offering a partnership. You keep the house, manage the domestic side. I'll handle the ranch work. A business arrangement. Yes. And if I refuse? He put his hat back on, already turning toward the door.
This story was posted
Then I
on the
wish you
channel
luck with
west
Winter,
of Betrayal.
Miss Thornfield.
Please do not
You're going to
repost
need
it in any form.
He was gone before she could respond, his horse's hoofbeats fading into the dark. Eliza stood in her freezing soddy, hands shaking with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. The audacity of it. The cold calculation. The absolute gall of a stranger offering marriage like it was a cattle trade. She didn't sleep that night. By morning, she'd made her decision. Oh, she found him 3 days later at the surveyor's office, leaning against the wall with the patience of someone used to bureaucracy. He looked up when she entered, expression unreadable. I have conditions, Eliza said, without preamble. Something shifted in his eyes. All right. I keep teaching. The school's only 4 miles from your land. I can ride it. Agreed. I'm not giving up my books or my education. I won't be treated like I'm stupid just because I'm a woman. Wouldn't dream of it. And if this doesn't work, she took a breath. If either of us wants out, we part civilly. No violence, no retribution. Clean and done. He extended his hand. Deal. His grip was calloused, firm, completely impersonal, like shaking hands with a business partner, which she supposed was exactly what he was. They were married by the circuit judge that Friday. No ceremony, no witnesses beyond the clerk who recorded it. Eliza wore her second-best dress. The good one was too worn, and there seemed no point in pretending this was anything other than what it was. Rourke wore the same trail clothes he'd worn when he proposed, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. The judge seemed equally uncomfortable. Do you, Eliza Ann Thornfield, take this man? The words washed over her. She said, I do, when prompted, heard Rourke do the same, and then it was done. She was a wife, Mrs. Callahan. The name felt like a costume. Well, Rourke said once they were outside, I've got supplies to load. We can head out in an hour. Eliza looked at the town she'd called home for 5 years, the schoolhouse where she'd tried to plant seeds of learning in rocky soil, the soddy that had sheltered her loneliness, the general store where women whispered behind their hands about the spinster teacher. None of it had ever really been hers. I'm ready now, she said. They rode in silence. The valley opened up gradually, the land rising in gentle swells before the mountains proper began. It was beautiful in a harsh way, all golden aspen and dark pine, granite outcrops thrusting through the soil like bones. Rourke's ranch sat in a natural bowl, protected on 3 sides by ridges, open to the south where the sun could reach. The house was better than she'd expected. 2 stories, solid pine logs chinked tight against the wind, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Not grand, but honest. Built to last. Built it myself, Rourke said, swinging down from his horse. 6 years ago. Been adding to it as I could afford lumber. He helped her down, the first time he'd touched her since shaking hands at the surveyor's office. His hands were strong, careful, and gone the instant her feet hit ground. Inside was sparse but clean. Main room with a stone fireplace, kitchen area with an actual iron stove, narrow stairs leading up. The furniture was handmade, rough but functional. No curtains, no rugs, no softness anywhere. It looked like what it was, a place where a man lived alone and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Your room's upstairs, Rourke said. Second door. There's a bed, dresser, window that actually closes. I'm in the back room down here. Eliza climbed the stairs with her single bag of possessions. The room was small, cold, empty except for the promised furniture. But the bed had a real mattress, corn husk maybe, but better than she'd slept on in years. And the window looked out over the valley, toward mountains that were already wearing snow on their highest peaks. She sat on the bed and tried to understand what she'd done. Married a stranger. Moved to his isolated ranch. Agreed to build a life with someone she knew nothing about. It was possibly the most reckless thing she'd ever done, or the most practical. Hard to tell which. The first week was awkward as hell. They circled each other like wary dogs, establishing territories and routines. Rourke was up before dawn, out working until dark, coming in only for meals. Eliza threw herself into making the house livable, scrubbing floors, organizing the kitchen, trying to impose order on chaos. They barely spoke except for necessary coordination. Need anything from town? No. Coffee's ready? Thanks. Conversations that went nowhere, said nothing, revealed nothing. At night, Eliza lay in her narrow bed and listened to the house settle around her. Sometimes she heard Rourke moving downstairs, restless. Once she woke to the sound of him outside, chopping wood at 2 a.m, like demons were chasing him. She didn't ask, he didn't offer, but slowly, grudgingly, a rhythm developed. Rourke started leaving coffee made when she came down. She started cooking enough dinner that he had leftovers for the next day. Small gestures, nothing romantic, just two people learning to exist in the same space without collision. The first real conversation happened by accident. Eliza was on the porch, trying to read in the fading light, when Rourke came back from checking fence lines. He stopped when he saw her, seemed about to head straight for the barn, then changed his mind and sat on the steps instead. They didn't speak for several minutes. "What are you reading?" he finally asked. She showed him the cover. "George Eliot, Middlemarch." "Any good?" "It's about people making complicated choices in small towns where everyone watches." She allowed herself a small smile. "So, fairly relatable." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Suppose so." More silence, but it felt different now, less hostile. "You ever regret it?" Eliza asked. "Coming out here?" He thought about that. "Every winter. Then spring comes and I remember why I stayed." "Which is?" "Nobody telling me who to be." He glanced at her. "You?" "Every day," she admitted. "Then I remember what I left behind and regret that too." "What was that?" "A family that wanted me married and conventional. A society that thought teaching was adorable until I turned 25 and it became tragic." She closed the book. "I came out here thinking I'd prove something, not sure what." "Did you?" "I proved I could survive. Not sure that's the same as proving I was right." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know that feeling." They sat there as the sun dropped behind the mountains, turning the valley purple and gold. Something had shifted. Not warmth exactly, but the beginning of understanding. They were both running from something, both trying to make peace with choices that didn't have easy answers. "I'm going to check the barn," Rourke said, standing. "Then I'll be in. I'll keep dinner warm." Small words, domestic and unremarkable. But somehow they felt like progress. The first snow came in mid-October. Just a dusting, nothing serious, but it put an edge in the air that meant business. Rourke started working longer hours, bringing cattle down from the high pastures, reinforcing the barn, laying in extra feed. Eliza watched the preparations with growing unease. "How bad does it get?" she asked one morning. He was checking his rifle, cleaning it with practiced efficiency. "Last year we got 6 feet. Year before that, 8. Once the pass closes, we're alone until April." "Completely?" "Completely." He didn't look up. "That a problem?" Yes. Some part of her wanted to scream. Being snowed in for months with a man who barely talks, in a place where the nearest neighbor is 10 miles away, is absolutely a problem. But what she said was, "No, just planning." She returned to teaching that week, riding the 4 miles to the schoolhouse 3 days a week. It felt good to have purpose beyond cooking and cleaning, to see her students' faces, to remember she was more than just someone's wife in name only. The children were curious about her marriage. She could see it in their sideways glances, their carefully casual questions. "How's married life, Miss Thornfield?" Sarah Beckham asked. "Mrs. Callahan now," Eliza corrected gently, "and it's different." "Different good or different bad?" "Different uncertain," Eliza said honestly, "like anything new." On her third ride back, she noticed the rider, half a mile behind, keeping pace but not closing, too far to identify but deliberate in his following. Her heart kicked up. She had Rourke's spare pistol in her saddlebag. He'd insisted, taught her to load it even though she'd never fired one, but the thought of actually using it made her hands sweat. The rider followed her all the way to the property line, then turned off. Eliza told Rourke that night. His expression went flat. "Describe him." "Too far to see clearly. Medium height, dark horse, good tack." "Direction he went?" "East, toward the Morrison Range. Something dangerous flickered in Rourke's eyes. Silas Vane.
This story was posted on the channel
Neighbor,
west
if
of
you can call
Betrayal.
him that.
Please do not
Owns the land
repost
east
it
of
in
here,
any
up
form.
into the high country. We've got history. The way he said it made clear the history wasn't friendly. Should I be worried? Not yet. Rourke checked his rifle again, though it didn't need it. But don't ride alone anymore. If you have to go to town, I'll escort you. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling. His voice had gone hard. Vane's the kind of man who sees everything as a challenge. You being my wife now, that makes you part of this. Part of what? But he didn't answer, just went outside to check the property line. Eliza stood in the kitchen, fear creeping cold up her spine. She'd thought marriage to Rourke meant shelter from the world. She hadn't considered she might be stepping into someone else's war. November brought serious snow and something else, community. The Beckhams invited them to Sunday dinner. Eliza's first instinct was to refuse. She'd spent 5 years being politely excluded from Cedar Bluff's social circles, but Rourke surprised her. We should go, he said. Good to maintain connections before winter. They rode together, her side saddle pressed against his horse's flank for warmth. The Beckham homestead was smaller than Rourke's ranch, but warmer somehow. Children's voices, Mary Beckham's laughter, the smell of roasting meat. Mary greeted Eliza with genuine warmth. So glad you could come. And Mr. Callahan, welcome. David Beckham shook Rourke's hand with careful respect. Eliza noticed the way other men deferred to her husband, not fear exactly, but awareness. Rourke was the kind of man you didn't cross casually. Over dinner, the conversation drifted to land and weather and the usual frontier concerns. Then David mentioned Silas Vane. Heard he's been buying up mineral rights, David said carefully, offering good money for survey access. Rourke's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. What kind of access? Claims there's copper in the High Valley. Wants to dig test shafts, see what's there. On whose land? Anyone who'll sell. He's been to most of us. And? David shrugged. Turned him down. Don't trust mining operations. They promise wealth and deliver poison water. Rourke nodded slowly. Eliza could practically see him thinking, calculating. After dinner, Mary pulled Eliza aside while the men talked outside. How are you really? Mary asked. It's a big change, marrying and moving so quick. Eliza chose her words carefully. It's an adjustment. Rourke Callahan's a good man, Mary said. Quiet, keeps to himself, but decent. He had a rough time a few years back, lost his brother in bad circumstances. Hasn't been quite the same since. What happened? Mary glanced toward the window, lowered her voice. Cattle rustling that turned violent. His brother Jacob got caught in the middle, ended up dead. They never proved who did it, but Rourke's always believed it was Vane's men. Eliza's blood went cold. Did he go to the law? No law out here worth mentioning. The territorial marshal comes through twice a year if we're lucky. Mostly, we handle our own problems. Mary's expression was grave. That's why I'm telling you, if there's bad blood between your husband and Silas Vane, you need to be careful. Vane's not a man who forgives debts, real or imagined. The ride home was quiet. Eliza kept thinking about what Mary had said, about the brother Rourke had never mentioned, about the violence that might be sleeping just beneath the surface of her marriage. Mary told me about Jacob, she said finally. Rourke's shoulders tensed. Did she? Why didn't you mention him? Didn't seem relevant. Your brother's death isn't relevant? Happened 4 years ago. His voice was flat. Nothing to be done about it now. But you think Vane was responsible? He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, I know he was, just can't prove it. Jacob was going to testify about land fraud. Parcels Vane claimed didn't actually belong to him. 2 days before he was supposed to talk to the territorial surveyor, his horse came back without him. Found his body 3 days later. Thrown, they said. Broke his neck in the fall. You don't believe that? I believe my brother could ride anything with 4 legs. I believe he wouldn't fall unless something made him. Rourke's hands tightened on the reins. I believe Vane's been stealing land for years and killing anyone who gets in his way. Have you told the authorities? What authorities? The marshal who shows up twice a year and takes Vane's money? The territorial government that's too busy in Denver to care about frontier justice? He shook his head. Out here, you handle your own problems, or they don't get handled. Eliza felt something cold settle in her chest. Is that why you needed a wife? Someone to make your claim look legitimate while you plan revenge? He pulled the horse to a stop, turned to look at her directly. His eyes were hard, but underneath she saw something else, pain, old and deep. I needed a wife because I was tired of being alone, he said quietly. Because winter was coming and the house felt too empty. Because maybe I thought having someone there would remind me there's more to life than anger. He paused. But I won't lie to you, Eliza. If I get a chance to prove what Vane did, I'll take it, and that might bring trouble to your door. Our door, she corrected. I married you. That makes it my door too. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite warmth, but recognition. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it felt different now, like they'd crossed some invisible line from strangers to something else. Partners, maybe. Or at least two people who'd stopped pretending this was simple. December turned the valley into a white fortress. The snow came heavy and stayed, piling in drifts that swallowed fence posts and turned the landscape into an endless expanse of white. They were effectively alone now, cut off from town until spring thaw. The pass was impassable, the roads just suggestions under 6 feet of powder. Eliza had never experienced isolation like this. Even in her soddy, town had been a hard walk away. Here, there was nothing but Rourke, the house, the silent mountains, and weather that could kill you if you made a single mistake. They fell into routines born of necessity. Rourke handled the livestock, the endless work of keeping cattle alive through the cold. Eliza managed the house, rationing supplies, making sure they didn't run out of anything vital before April. They ate dinner together now, not because they wanted company, but because the alternative was eating alone in a house where loneliness echoed. Conversation came slowly, awkwardly, like people learning a new language. You ever been married before? Eliza asked one night. No. Ever come close? He was quiet for a moment. Once, long time ago, before I came west, girl in Virginia. Her family didn't approve of a man without property. I'm sorry. He shrugged. Worked out. She married a banker, had 3 kids, seems happy enough. I doubt she thinks about the boy who wanted to ranch in the territories. Do you think about her? Sometimes. Mostly I wonder who I'd be if I'd stayed, if I'd have found a way to make it work, become whatever her family wanted. He met her eyes. Probably would have been miserable. But safe. Safe and miserable isn't living. It's just existing slow. Eliza understood that more than she wanted to admit. The nights were the hardest. The house creaked in the cold, wind howling down from the peaks, like something alive and angry. Eliza would lie in her bed, listening to the storm, acutely aware that Rourke was 1 floor below, equally awake. One night, she heard him cry out. Not loud, a choked sound, quickly stifled, but unmistakable. She went downstairs before she could think better of it. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, head in his hands, breathing hard. He looked up when she appeared, and for a moment she saw him completely unguarded, lost, hurting, human in a way he never let show. Sorry, he said roughly. Didn't mean to wake you. Nightmare? Yeah. She should have left, should have respected his privacy, but something in his expression stopped her. Do you want to talk about it? No. Then, after a pause, Jacob. I dream about finding him sometimes. Except in the dream, he's still alive when I get there, and I have to watch him die anyway. Eliza sat down in the chair by the cold fireplace. How long has this been happening? 4 years. Some months are worse than others. Have you talked to anyone about it? His laugh was bitter. Who? The nearest doctor's 80 miles away, and he'd just tell me to drink whiskey and forget. That's frontier medicine. Ignore it until it kills you or goes away. That's not medicine, that's stupidity. Maybe, but it's what we've got. They sat there in the dark, not touching, not really talking, just existing in the same space. After a while, Rourke's breathing steadied. The tension left his shoulders. You don't have to stay, he said quietly. I know. But she didn't leave. She sat there until he fell asleep, then quietly went back upstairs. Something
This
had
story
changed.
was posted on
She
the
couldn't
channel
name it,
west
didn't
of
want to
Betrayal.
examine it too closely.
Please do not repost it
But the
in
wall
any
between
form.
them had developed a crack. Christmas came and went without ceremony. They had no tree, no decorations, no pretense of celebration. But Eliza made a better dinner than usual. Venison stew, biscuits that were almost fluffy, dried apple pie from fruit she'd preserved in the fall. Rourke carved her a wooden bookmark, simple but carefully done, sanded smooth. For your books, he said, awkward as a schoolboy. She'd made him new gloves lined with rabbit fur. Practical, nothing romantic about it. Your hands were getting torn up, she said. They sat by the fire that night, not talking much, just being. Outside, snow fell soft and steady. Inside, something like peace settled over the house. This isn't what I expected, Eliza said. What did you expect? I don't know. More awkward, maybe? Or more combative? Two people forced together who resented it. Do you? Resent it? She considered. No, it's strange and sometimes lonely even when you're right here, but I don't regret it. Neither do I. Simple words, but they felt like a gift. January brought wolves. They heard them first, howling in the high country, getting bolder as the cold deepened and prey got scarce. Then they started losing calves. Rourke found the first one torn apart 100 yards from the barn, blood bright against snow. He started sleeping in the barn, rifle across his lap, waiting. Eliza hated it, the cold, the danger, the stubborn refusal to ask for help. But she understood it too. This was his land, his herd, his responsibility. Asking someone else to handle it would have felt like failure. On the third night, she joined him. What are you doing? Rourke asked when she appeared with blankets and her own coat. Same as you, waiting. It's dangerous. Then we'll be dangerous together. He looked like he wanted to argue, then just nodded and made room. They sat in the dark barn, breath frosting, listening to cattle shift and settle. Hours passed. Eliza's feet went numb, then her hands. She was about to suggest going back to the house when Rourke tensed. There, he whispered. She saw them then, shadows moving along the tree line, eyes catching moonlight. 5 wolves, maybe 6, circling. Rourke raised his rifle slowly. When I fire, get behind the hay bales. They might scatter or they might charge. Either way, stay low. Her heart hammered. She'd never seen him like this, focused, deadly calm, every bit the soldier he must have been before ranching. The lead wolf broke from the trees. Rourke fired. The sound was massive in the confined space, echoing off rafters. The wolf dropped, and chaos exploded, the pack scattering, cattle screaming, everything noise and panic. Another wolf came at the barn door. Rourke fired again, missed, worked the bolt. The wolf was 10 feet away when Eliza grabbed a pitchfork and thrust it forward without thinking. The wolf yelped, veered off. Then they were gone, vanished into the forest as quickly as they'd come. Eliza stood there shaking, pitchfork still raised, adrenaline making her stupid. You all right? Rourke's hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. I think so. You? Yeah. He took the pitchfork gently from her hands. That was either very brave or very stupid. Can it be both? He smiled, a real smile, full and genuine. Yeah, definitely both. They checked the herd, found no new casualties, and finally headed back to the house as dawn turned the sky gray. Eliza's legs felt like water, her whole body thrumming with leftover fear. Thank you, Rourke said as they reached the porch, for coming out there, for... He trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. For not leaving me alone with it. We're partners, Eliza said. That's what you called this, right? A partnership? Right. But the way he looked at her suggested it might be starting to mean something more. Now, February was the longest month of her life. The snow didn't let up, the cold pressed in from all sides, and cabin fever started to feel less like a metaphor and more like an actual disease. They ran out of coffee first, then sugar, then any pretense that they weren't slowly going mad from isolation. They fought about stupid things. How to arrange firewood, whether to slaughter another chicken, the correct way to darn socks. Arguments that weren't really about socks or chickens, but about being trapped together with no escape and no end in sight. "You're being unreasonable," Eliza snapped during one particularly pointless argument about dishwashing. "I'm being unreasonable? You're the one who what? Who actually cleans things properly instead of just calling it done? I call it done because it is done. Just because it's not done to your exact specifications." They were standing toe-to-toe now, both breathing hard, both furious about nothing and everything. Then Rourke laughed. Just started laughing, deep and helpless, until Eliza couldn't help but join in. "This is insane," she gasped. "We're fighting about dishes." "I know." He wiped his eyes. "I know, I'm sorry. I think I'm losing my mind." "Join the club." They sat down at the table, exhausted from their own ridiculousness. "I'm not good at this," Rourke said quietly. "Living with someone. Sharing space. I've been alone too long. I'm not exactly practiced at it either." Eliza studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his hair. "But we're trying. That counts for something." "Does it?" "I think so. I hope so." He reached across the table, hesitated, then took her hand. His palm was calloused, warm, completely engulfing hers. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "Even when we're fighting about dishes, even when I'm difficult and you're stubborn and we're both going quietly crazy. I'm glad you're here." Eliza felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd been holding closed for a long time. "I'm glad I'm here too," she whispered. They sat there holding hands across the table while wind howled outside and the fire burned low, and Eliza realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that she was falling for her husband, her stranger husband, her business arrangement, her partner in survival. She was falling for him, and she had no idea what to do about it. March brought the thaw and Silas Vane. The snow started melting in fits and starts, revealing a landscape brutalized by winter. Dead cattle in the far pastures, trees snapped by ice, fences down everywhere. Rourke worked from dawn to dusk trying to salvage what he could. Eliza had just returned from her first trip to the schoolhouse, the pass barely open, roads still treacherous, when she saw the riders, 3 of them, coming up from the valley road. The leader sat his horse like a king surveying property he already owned. Silas Vane. She'd never met him, but she knew instantly. Mid-50s, iron-gray hair, face like a hawk, all sharp angles and cold appraisal. The men flanking him were muscle, pure and simple. The kind you hired when words weren't going to be enough. Eliza went to find Rourke. He was in the barn, and his expression when she told him went dark as a storm front. "Stay inside," he said, checking his rifle. "Like hell." "Eliza, we're partners, remember? I'm not hiding while you deal with this alone." They met Vane in the yard. He dismounted with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never known real consequences. "Callahan," he said, smiling. "Heard you got yourself married over the winter. Wanted to come by, offer congratulations." "We're not accepting visitors," Rourke said flatly. "Now that's not very neighborly." Vane's eyes slid to Eliza, assessing, dismissive. "This the school teacher? Heard you picked up damaged goods. Guess beggars can't be choosers." Rourke moved so fast, Eliza barely saw it. One moment standing still, the next with his rifle aimed at Vane's chest. "Get off my land!" Vane didn't flinch. "Easy there, Callahan. Just making conversation." "You don't make conversation. You make threats. So make yours and leave." "All right." Vane's smile died. "I'm buying up mineral rights in this valley. Copper Survey says there's a fortune in these hills. I'm offering fair price for access to your high pastures." "Not interested." "Didn't let me finish. I'm offering fair price now. Later, when the territorial government grants me mineral access anyway, you'll get nothing. Your choice. Take money now or lose it for free later." "You can't force mineral rights on private land." "Can I?" Vane's expression was ugly. "I've got friends in Denver, Callahan, friends who owe me favors, friends who can make your ownership very complicated, very quickly. My deed is legal. Legal is whatever the territorial surveyor says it is, and Jacob's not around to testify about those boundary disputes anymore, is he?" Rourke went white. Eliza stepped forward before he could do something they'd both regret. Mr. Vane, she said, voice steady, you've made your offer. My husband has declined. I think we're done here. Vane looked
This
at her like
story
she
was
was a
posted on the
particularly
channel
annoying
West of
insect.
Betrayal. Please do
adults
not
are talking,
repost it
sweetheart.
in any form.
The adults are leaving, Eliza said, before things get unpleasant. You threatening me? I'm reminding you that you're on private property, making unwelcome demands, and you have 5 seconds before my husband exercises his right to defend said property. 1, 2. Vane stared at her, then laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You got yourself a fierce one, Callahan. Hope she's worth the trouble she's going to cause. He swung back into the saddle. Think about my offer. Copper's coming to this valley whether you like it or not. Better to profit than to be rolled over. They rode off, leaving Eliza and Rourke standing in the yard. Rourke lowered his rifle slowly. You shouldn't have. Don't! Eliza rounded on him. Don't tell me I shouldn't have stepped in. He was baiting you, trying to make you do something stupid. He killed my brother. Maybe. Probably. But shooting him in our yard won't bring Jacob back. It'll just get you hanged.
So what do I do? Let him steal my land? Let him get away with murder? No. Eliza's mind was racing. We prove it. We find evidence, we document everything, and we make a case that even the territorial government can't ignore. How? I don't know yet, but we figure it out together. Rourke looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. Together, he repeated. And despite everything, the threats, the danger, the impossible odds, Eliza felt something like hope. They stood there in the mud and melting snow, two people who'd started as strangers and become something else, and prepared to fight for the life they were building. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. That would have to be enough. The evidence started small. 3 days after Vane's visit, Eliza was reorganizing the cluttered storage room off the kitchen when she found the ledger. Leather-bound, water-stained, tucked behind a broken chair, like someone had tried to hide it and forgotten. She opened it to pages filled with Jacob's handwriting, careful notations of land surveys, property boundaries, dates and measurements that meant nothing to her, but clearly had mattered to him. She brought it to Rourke that evening. He was at the kitchen table cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time that week, a habit that told her his mind was elsewhere. Found this? She said, setting the ledger down. His hand stilled. He stared at the book like it might bite him. Where? Storage room, behind some furniture. He opened it slowly, and she watched his face change as he recognized his brother's writing. Pain, sharp and fresh, like the wound had never really closed. Jacob kept records, Rourke said quietly. Everything. Survey markers, fence lines, water rights. He was meticulous about it. His finger traced a column of numbers. He was building a case, documenting discrepancies between Vane's claim boundaries and the actual territorial surveys. What kind of discrepancies? The kind that meant Vane was claiming land that wasn't his, hundreds of acres, maybe more. Jacob found survey markers that had been moved, landmarks that didn't match official records. Rourke's jaw tightened. He was going to present this to the territorial surveyor, prove Vane had been stealing land for years. And then he died. And then he died. Eliza pulled out a chair, sat across from him. Show me. Teach me what I'm looking at. They spent the next 2 hours going through the ledger page by page. Rourke explained survey terminology, boundary markers, the arcane language of land ownership that governed everything out here. Eliza took notes, asked questions, started to see the pattern Jacob had been documenting. Here, she said, pointing to an entry dated 3 years back. Jacob notes the northwest corner marker at a specific elevation. But look, 2 months later, same marker, different elevation. It moved uphill. Markers don't move uphill on their own. Exactly. Her mind was racing now. If we can find these markers, document their current positions, compare them to the original surveys, we'd have proof, physical evidence that Vane's been manipulating boundaries. Could we do it? The survey, just the two of us? Rourke studied the ledger, thinking. It'd take weeks. We'd have to ride the entire property line, locate every marker Jacob documented, take measurements, and we'd be exposed. If Vane realizes what we're doing, he'll try to stop us. Violently! They looked at each other across the table. The lamp flickered between them,
casting shadows that made the decision feel even heavier. "We have to try," Eliza said. "Don't we?" Rourke closed the ledger carefully. "Yeah, we do." The next morning, they started planning. Rourke sketched out the property boundaries, marking the locations of survey markers Jacob had documented. Eliza compiled a list of supplies they'd need, measuring equipment, notebooks, camping gear. They'd have to cover ground that ranged from valley floor to high timber, some of it accessible only on foot. "We'll start with the eastern boundary," Rourke said, "the section that borders Vane's land. That's where Jacob found the most discrepancies." "How long?" 3 days, maybe 4. Rough country, slow going. Eliza thought about her students, the school she'd just reopened. "I'll need to close the schoolhouse." "You don't have to come, I can handle." "We've been over this. Partners, remember?" He smiled slightly. "Just making sure you know what you're signing up for." "Cold camps, hard riding, possible violence from our homicidal neighbor?" She shrugged. "Sounds like a normal week." They left 2 days later, packs loaded, rifles ready. The eastern boundary started in the valley and climbed into broken country where the land buckled and folded on itself. Beautiful in a harsh way, but treacherous. Loose rock, sudden drops, places where one wrong step meant a long fall. They found the first marker exactly where Jacob's ledger said it should be. A granite post sunk deep, carved with the territorial seal and a date from 15 years back. Rourke measured its position against the ridgeline, checked the elevation with a surveyor's level he'd borrowed from town. "Matches Jacob's original notation," he said, "which means it hasn't been moved." "So Vane's men missed this one?" "Or didn't bother. It's in a difficult spot, hard to access. Easier targets elsewhere." They moved on, following the boundary north. The second marker was gone entirely, just a hole in the ground where it should have been. Rourke took careful notes while Eliza sketched the surrounding terrain for reference. "Jacob noted this marker at the base of that rock formation," Rourke said, pointing. "Now there's nothing. Could it have fallen? Erosion or something? Granite posts don't erode in 15 years. Someone pulled it." They camped that night in a narrow canyon, no fire for fear of drawing attention. Cold jerky and colder bread, wrapped in blankets against the chill. Above them, stars wheeled in a sky so clear it hurt to look at. "You ever wonder what we're doing?" Eliza asked. "Every minute of every day." "I mean really doing, not just the survey, but all of it. This life." Rourke was quiet for a moment. "I used to think I knew. Came out here to make something of myself, build something that was mine. Now," he trailed off, "now I'm not sure if I'm building or just holding on. Maybe it's both. Maybe." He looked at her in the darkness. "What about you? You miss teaching, the schoolhouse." "Sometimes. But this feels important too. Maybe more important." She pulled the blanket tighter. "Those kids deserve a future that isn't determined by men like Vane. If we can prove what he's done, maybe the next generation has a chance at something honest." "That's a lot of weight to put on a property survey." "I know, but it's what we've got." The second day brought them into higher country, and with it, trouble. They were working their way along a ridge when Eliza spotted the riders below, 3 men moving parallel to their route about a mile distant. "Company," she said quietly. Rourke pulled out his field glasses, studied them. His expression went grim. "Vane's men. I recognized the horses." "Following us? Or patrolling? Either way, they know we're here." They moved faster after that, trying to document markers before Vane's men could interfere. The third marker had been moved, reset 50 yards from where Jacob's notes placed it, shifting the boundary line significantly onto what should have been Rourke's land. "This is it," Rourke said, measuring carefully. "This is the proof we need. A marker deliberately relocated to expand Vane's property. Can we photograph it? Don't have a camera, but we can document everything, measurements, position, the fresh concrete around the base where it was reset." He was already sketching, writing notes, building their case piece by piece. They were so focused they almost missed the sound of approaching horses. Eliza heard it first, hoofbeats on rock, multiple riders, moving fast. She grabbed Rourke's arm, pointed down the slope. 5 men this time, climbing toward them with clear purpose. "We need to move," Rourke said, shoving his notebook into his pack. They scrambled higher, into a field of broken boulders that slowed the horses but gave them cover. The riders spread out, trying to box them in. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. They were armed, but 5 against 2 was suicide
This story
odds.
was posted on the channel west
There,
of Betrayal.
Rourke hissed,
Please do
pointing
not
to a narrow
repost
gap
it
between
in any
two
form.
massive rocks. Go. They squeezed through into a small depression hidden from below. Not exactly a defensible position, but better than being caught in the open. Rourke had his rifle ready, watching the gaps between boulders. The riders passed within 20 feet. Eliza held her breath, pressed against cold stone, Rourke's body between her and the opening. She could hear the men talking. Lost them in the rocks. Can't have gone far. Spread out. Check every hole. Vane said not to kill Callahan. The woman's fair game, though. Ice flooded Eliza's veins. Rourke's hand tightened on his rifle, but he didn't move. Patience born of experience, waiting for the right moment. The voices faded as the riders moved on. They stayed hidden another hour, until they were certain the men had given up and moved down the mountain. When they finally emerged, the sun was dropping toward the peaks. "We can't stay out here," Rourke said. "Too exposed. We need to get back." "We haven't finished the survey." "We have enough. 3 markers documented, 1 clearly moved. That's evidence." He was already packing. "But it won't matter if we're dead." They rode hard, taking a different route back to avoid Vane's men. Reached the ranch after dark, exhausted and on edge. Rourke checked the barn first, the house second, moving with the caution of someone who'd learned not to assume safety. Inside, Eliza lit lamps with shaking hands. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her hollow and scared. "That man said I was fair game," she said quietly. Rourke was at the window, watching the darkness. "I heard." "What does that mean?" He turned to face her. "It means Vane's willing to hurt you to get to me. It means this just got a lot more dangerous than property disputes. I'm not leaving. I wasn't going to ask you to." He crossed the room, took her hands. They were still trembling. "But I need you to understand what we're up against. Vane's not going to stop. He'll escalate, try to force us out, or shut us up permanently. So we take what we found to the authorities." "What authorities? The territorial marshal who's in Vane's pocket? The surveyor's office that's 100 miles away and might not care? There has to be someone." "Maybe. Or maybe we're on our own." Eliza pulled her hands free, started pacing. Her mind was racing, sorting through options. "What about the newspaper, the Rocky Mountain News out of Denver? They cover territorial corruption." Rourke looked skeptical. "They also print whatever makes headlines. We'd need more than accusations. We have Jacob's ledger. We have our documentation of the moved marker. We have a pattern of land fraud." She was gaining momentum now. "If we can get a reporter interested, someone who'll investigate, it could work," Rourke said slowly. "Or it could paint a bigger target on our backs. We already have a target. At least this way we're shooting back." He studied her face, and something like pride flickered in his expression. "When did you get so fierce?" "When someone called me fair game." The next week was spent preparing their case. Eliza wrote everything out in clear, detailed prose. The history of the land dispute, Jacob's documentation, their survey findings, Vane's threats. She made 3 copies, careful and precise, her teacher's handwriting turning rough evidence into something that looked official. Rourke added maps, sketches, measurements. Together they built a narrative that was hard to ignore, a pattern of systematic land theft backed by violence. "How do we get this to Denver?" Eliza asked. "Carefully." Rourke was checking supplies. "The stage runs once a week. We send it with someone trustworthy, someone Vane won't think to intercept." "Who?" He thought about it. "Mary Beckham. She's going to visit her sister in Denver next month. We could ask her to deliver it to the newspaper office." They rode to the Beckham homestead the following day. Mary welcomed them with her usual warmth, but her face grew serious when she heard what they wanted. "This is dangerous," she said, holding the packet of documents. "If Vane finds out I'm carrying this—" "He won't," Rourke said. "As far as anyone knows, you're just visiting family." "And if the newspaper won't print it?" "Then we've lost nothing but paper and ink," Eliza said. "But if they do, if they send someone to investigate, it could change everything." Mary looked at David, who'd been listening from the doorway. He nodded slowly. "We'll do it," Mary said. Jacob was a good man. If there's a chance to bring his killers to justice, we'll take it. They left feeling something close to hope. It was fragile, easily broken, but it was there. That fragile hope lasted exactly 4 days. Eliza was at the schoolhouse when it happened. She'd reopened classes, trying to maintain some normalcy while they waited for Mary's trip to Denver. The children were working on arithmetic when Sarah Beckham came running in, breathless and terrified. Mrs. Callahan, you have to come. There's men at your house." Eliza's blood went cold. "What men?" "Don't know, but they got guns and they're going through everything." She dismissed the students, told them to run straight home. Then she rode harder than she'd ever ridden, fear making her reckless. Halfway there, she saw smoke. The barn was burning. She pulled up at the property line, horror flooding through her. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching for the sky, black smoke pouring into the afternoon. 3 men stood watching it burn, making no effort to stop it. Vane's men, she recognized them from the mountain. And Rourke was nowhere. She rode in fast, past the men who turned to watch her with ugly grins. "Where is he?" "Who?" "My husband." "Where is he?" The biggest one spat tobacco juice. "Probably in the barn. Was last we saw him." Terror like she'd never known ripped through her. She was off the horse and running before she could think, heading for the barn entrance. Hands grabbed her, pulled her back. "Wouldn't do that, lady. Whole thing's coming down." She fought them, screaming Rourke's name, trying to break free. Then she heard it, a shout from behind the barn, hoarse and angry. Rourke came around the corner, limping, face blackened with soot. Alive. Relief hit her so hard she nearly fell. He reached her, pushed past Vane's men like they weren't there, and caught her against him. "I'm all right," he said roughly. "I'm all right." "The barn?" "Just a building. Cattle are out, horses are safe, just wood and hay." But his hands on her shoulders were shaking, and she could see the rage burning in his eyes as hot as the fire behind them. The biggest man laughed. "Consider that a warning, Callahan. Stop poking around where you don't belong, or next time it's the house, with both of you in it." Rourke moved so fast even Eliza didn't see it coming. One moment he was standing there, the next he had the man by the throat, slammed against the fence hard enough to rattle teeth. "You come on my land again," Rourke said, voice dead calm, "and I'll kill you. No warning, no mercy. Just dead. Understand?" The man couldn't answer, couldn't breathe. His companions reached for their guns but froze when they saw Eliza had Rourke's rifle pointed at them. "I'd listen to him," she said, surprised by how steady her voice was. "He's not making idle threats." Rourke released the man, who collapsed gasping. "Get out. Tell Vane if he wants a war, he's got one." They left, riding hard, casting nervous glances back. The barn burned itself out over the next hour. Eliza and Rourke stood watching it, not speaking, holding each other's hands tight enough to hurt. Everything they'd stored there, tools, hay, winter feed, gone. Thousands of dollars in losses they couldn't afford. "This is my fault," Rourke said finally. "I pushed too hard. Should have known he'd retaliate." "This is Vane's fault, not yours. I brought you into this. I should have—" "Stop." She turned to face him. "I made my choice. I'm here because I want to be, because I believe in what we're doing. Don't take that away from me by treating me like I didn't know what I was choosing." His expression cracked. "I thought you were in there. When I saw the smoke, realized you weren't at school, I thought—" He couldn't finish. "I'm here. I'm fine." She touched his face, wiped away soot and ash. "We're both fine. For now. For now is all we've ever had." They salvaged what they could from the wreckage, moved the cattle to a different pasture, tried to calculate damages. The financial hit was devastating, but worse was the message. Vane could reach them any time, anywhere. Their home wasn't safe. That night, Rourke slept on the floor of Eliza's room, rifle across his lap. She didn't argue. The distance they'd maintained between them seemed pointless now, a formality that didn't match reality. "Tell me something," she said into the darkness. "Something good." He was quiet for a long time. "When I was a kid before the war, we had this dog. Worthless mutt. Couldn't hunt, couldn't herd. Just took up space and ate scraps. My father wanted to shoot it, said we couldn't afford to feed something that didn't earn its keep. What happened? Jacob hid it, kept it secret for 3 months, feeding it from his own plate, sleeping in the barn so our father
This
wouldn't hear
story
it.
was posted
When he
on the
finally
channel
got
west
found
of
out,
Betrayal.
it took the beating
Please
without
do not
complaint.
repost it in
Said
any
some
form.
things were worth protecting, even if they didn't make sense on paper. Eliza felt tears on her face. Jacob sounds like he was a good man. Best I knew, and Vane killed him for being honest. Rourke's voice was rough. That's what I can't forgive. Not the land, not the theft. The fact that he killed someone good for daring to tell the truth. We'll make it right. Will we? Or are we just going to get ourselves killed trying? I don't know, Eliza admitted, but I'd rather die trying than live as a coward. You're not a coward. You're the bravest person I've ever met. She got up, crossed the small room, sat down beside him on the floor. He didn't move, didn't pull away. She leaned against his shoulder, felt him shift to hold her weight. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. They sat there in the dark, two people who'd started as strangers and become something neither had quite intended. Partners, friends, maybe more than that. Maybe a lot more. Rourke? Yeah? I'm glad I married you. His arm tightened around her. Even now? Even with all this? Especially now. Mary left for Denver 3 days later. She carried their documentation hidden in a hat box, looking for all the world like a woman going to visit family. They didn't tell anyone else. The fewer people who knew, the safer Mary would be. 2 weeks, David Beckham said as they loaded the wagon. Maybe 3 before we hear anything. That's if the newspaper bites, Rourke said. They'll bite, Mary said firmly. This story is too big to ignore. They watched the wagon disappear down the valley road, carrying their hopes with it. The next 2 weeks were tense as a drawn bowstring. Vane's men were everywhere, watching the property, following them to town, making their presence known. Not threatening, not yet, but the message was clear. We're watching, we're waiting. Eliza kept teaching, but with Rourke's pistol in her desk drawer now. The children sensed the tension, grew quieter, more watchful. Sarah Beckham asked once if she was scared. Yes, Eliza admitted, but being scared doesn't mean you stop doing what's right. My mama says you and Mr. Callahan are being foolish, says you should leave before something bad happens. Your mama's probably right, but sometimes foolish is all you've got. At home, they fortified. Rourke reinforced the doors, set up warning bells, taught Eliza to shoot properly instead of just holding a gun and hoping. They worked together, moved together, developed the kind of partnership that came from shared danger. And slowly, almost without noticing, the distance between them disappeared. It happened in small ways first. Rourke's hand on her back as he passed, Eliza touching his shoulder when he was deep in thought, sitting closer at dinner, their knees touching under the table. Small intimacies that would have felt presumptuous a month ago, but now seemed natural. Then one night, after a particularly tense day watching Vane's men circle the property, Eliza came downstairs to find Rourke at the table, Jacob's ledger open in front of him. Can't sleep? She asked. Keeps going through my head. All the ways this could go wrong. She sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. Tell me one way it goes right. What? One scenario where we win, where Vane faces justice and we get to keep this life we're building. He thought about it. Reporter comes, investigates, finds enough evidence to force a territorial inquiry. Federal marshal gets involved, someone Vane can't buy. Trial happens, jury convicts. Vane goes to prison or hangs. We get our land back, our lives back. And then? Then, he looked at her. Then, I don't know. I never let myself think past survival. Maybe it's time to start. What would you want? If we get through this, Eliza considered. A bigger schoolhouse, more books, maybe expand into adult education, teach the women who never got a chance. She paused. Children, eventually. Ours, I mean. His breath caught. Ours? If you wanted. If this marriage became... She struggled for words. Real. In all the ways it isn't yet. Rourke turned to face her fully. It feels real to me already. Has for weeks.
Then maybe we stop pretending it's just a business arrangement. He reached up, touched her face with calloused fingers. I don't deserve you. Good thing I don't care about deserve. He kissed her then, soft and tentative, like he was afraid she'd vanish. She kissed him back, tasting smoke and coffee and something that might have been hope. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were bright. Eliza? Don't say anything. Not yet. Just... She took his hand. Come upstairs with me. They climbed the narrow stairs together, crossed the threshold into her room, and closed the door on the outside world. Whatever happened next, whether they won or lost, lived or died, they'd face it as something more than partners. They'd face it as they should have from the beginning, together, completely, without walls between them. The morning brought a rider from town, young Tommy Fletcher, the blacksmith's son, red-faced and out of breath. Message from Denver, he gasped, handing Rourke a folded paper. Came on yesterday's stage. Rourke opened it, read quickly. His expression shifted from tense to something close to triumph. They're sending someone, he said. The Rocky Mountain News. Reporter named Harrison Grant, due to arrive next week to investigate. Eliza felt hope surge, bright and dangerous. They believed us? Enough to look into it. He was already thinking ahead. We'll need to take him to the markers, show him everything. Get statements from others who've had land troubles with Vane. The Beckhams will talk. Maybe the Morrisons, too. They spent the week preparing, gathering every scrap of evidence they could find. Other families came forward quietly, sharing their own stories of Vane's intimidation and theft. A pattern emerged, bigger than just one boundary dispute. A systematic effort to control the entire valley through fraud and fear. Harrison Grant arrived on a Tuesday, looking nothing like Eliza expected. Mid-30s, spectacles, Eastern suit already dusty from the stage ride. But his eyes were sharp, skeptical in a way that suggested he wouldn't accept easy answers. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, he said, shaking hands. I'll be direct. Your story sounds sensational, too sensational. I'm here to determine if there's real evidence or just frontier grudges. There's evidence, Rourke said. We can show you. They took him through everything over the next 3 days. The ledger, the survey markers, the documentation of fraud. Introduced him to families who'd lost land, shown him the pattern of intimidation and violence. Grant asked hard questions, took careful notes, photographed evidence with a bulky camera he'd brought from Denver. On the third day, they took him to see the boundary markers in person. Showed him the one that had been moved, the measurements that proved it. Grant studied it for over an hour, taking photographs from every angle, checking their documentation against the physical evidence. This is solid, he admitted finally. If this marker was originally where your brother's notes say it was, someone deliberately relocated it to expand Vane's property. That's fraud. Will you print it? Eliza asked. I need to interview Vane first, get his side. That's dangerous, Rourke said flatly. I'm a journalist. Dangerous is part of the job. But Grant looked nervous despite the brave words. They rode with him to Vane's ranch the next day, Rourke insisting on the escort. The place was twice the size of Rourke's spread. Sprawling house, multiple barns, cattle as far as the eye could see. The wealth built on stolen land. Vane received them in his study, all false hospitality and cold eyes. Mr. Grant, he said smoothly, I understand you're writing about our little territorial dispute. More than a dispute from what I've seen, Grant said. Care to explain why survey markers on the Callahan property have been moved? Moved? I wouldn't know anything about that. These mountains shift. Markers get displaced by weather and wildlife. Granite markers don't get displaced by weather. Vane's smile didn't reach his eyes. Young man, I've been developing this territory for 20 years. I've dealt with every kind of charlatan and claim jumper you can imagine. The Callahans are just the latest trying to make trouble. By documenting survey fraud? By making false accusations they can't prove. Grant pulled out his notebook. I've photographed evidence of markers being reset. I've interviewed multiple families who've lost land to your company. I've reviewed territorial survey records that don't match your claim boundaries. That's not false accusations, Mr. Vane. That's a pattern. Vane's expression went cold as winter. Be very careful, Mr. Grant. The frontier isn't kind to troublemakers. Accidents happen. People disappear. Is that a threat? It's a fact of life out here. You print lies about me, you'll learn that lesson the hard way. They left quickly, Grant pale and shaken. Outside, Rourke checked the road for riders. You still going to print it? Rourke
This
asked.
story was posted
Grant's
on the
hands were
channel
trembling,
west
but
of
his
Betrayal.
jaw was set.
Please do not repost
Absolutely.
it in any
That
form.
man just threatened a member of the press. That alone is newsworthy. He looked at them both. But you understand what this means? Once this story breaks, Vane will retaliate. Hard. We know, Eliza said. And you're prepared for that? Rourke took her hand. We're prepared for whatever comes. Grant left on the evening stage, carrying his notes and photographs. They watched him go, knowing they'd just lit a fuse they couldn't unlight. The explosion would come soon enough. The newspaper hit Cedar Bluff 4 days later. Eliza was at the general store when she saw it. A stack of Rocky Mountain newspapers fresh off the morning stage. Harrison Grant's byline bold across the front page. Land Baron's empire built on fraud and blood. Investigation reveals systematic theft in Cedar Valley. She bought 3 copies with shaking hands and rode straight home. Rourke was in the corral, working with a young horse, but he stopped when he saw her face. She held up the paper without a word. They read it together on the porch, standing close, his arm around her shoulders as they absorbed Grant's work. He documented everything, the moved markers, the discrepancies in surveys, the pattern of families losing land. He'd interviewed a dozen sources, pulled territorial records, even found a former surveyor willing to testify that Vane had bribed him to falsify documents, and he'd connected it all to Jacob's death. The timing is damning, Grant had written. Jacob Callahan dies in a riding accident 2 days before scheduled testimony about land fraud. His brother Rourke inherits the contested property and immediately faces escalating harassment and threats. When asked directly about Jacob Callahan's death, Silas Vane refused to answer, stating only that accidents happen in rough country. This reporter finds such coincidence difficult to accept. The article ended with a call for federal investigation and territorial prosecution. It's everything we needed, Eliza said. Everything Jacob tried to prove. Rourke was reading it again, slower this time. It's also a declaration of war. Vane won't let this stand. What can he do? It's published. People know. People knowing and people doing something about it are different things. He folded the paper carefully. We need to be ready. They spent the afternoon preparing. Rourke checked ammunition, cleaned weapons, positioned rifles at strategic points throughout the house. Eliza packed emergency supplies, food, water, medical kit, important documents, and hid them in the root cellar. They worked in tense silence, both understanding what was coming even if they couldn't predict exactly when or how. The answer came that night. Eliza woke to Rourke's hand over her mouth, his voice urgent in her ear. Don't scream. We've got company. She was instantly awake, heart pounding. Through the window, she could see lights moving in the darkness, torches, multiple riders surrounding the house. How many? She whispered. At least 8, maybe more. He was already dressed, rifle in hand. They're setting up in a perimeter. We're trapped. What do they want? Same thing they've always wanted. Us gone. A voice called from the darkness. Vane himself, unmistakable even at a distance. Callahan, come out and we'll talk. Stay inside and things get ugly. Rourke moved to the window, staying back from the glass. You're on my property, Vane. That's trespassing. Your property? Vane's laugh was cold. That newspaper story was interesting fiction. Shame about the lies. Wasn't lies. Was truth backed by evidence. Evidence that'll disappear once you do. Funny how that works. A pause. Last chance, Callahan. Come out peaceable, sign over the land, and you both walk away alive. Stay stubborn, and we burn you out like the vermin you are. Eliza grabbed Rourke's arm. Don't go out there. He'll kill you the moment you step outside. I know. He was calculating, thinking. But if we stay here, he'll make good on the burning threat. We need options. The root cellar. We could... They'll check it. They'll check everywhere. He looked at her, and his expression was fierce. I need you to do something for me. Something hard. What? There's a loose board in the back bedroom floor, leads to a crawl space that runs under the porch. You can get out that way. Make for the trees before they know you're gone. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Someone needs to survive this. Get word to the territorial marshal. Make sure Vane doesn't bury this story along with us. No. Her voice was flat, final. We're in this together. That's what we agreed. Eliza, you don't get to send me away to safety while you die here alone. That's not how this works. Outside, Vane was getting impatient. 10 seconds, Callahan. Then we start shooting. Rourke pulled her close, kissed her hard. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Good thing you married me then. He smiled despite everything, then moved to the gun cabinet and started handing her weapons. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. You take the shotgun, I'll use the rifle. They come through the door, we make them regret it. They positioned themselves, Rourke at the front window, Eliza covering the back. The house felt small suddenly, fragile against what was coming. Vane's voice cut through the night again. Time's up. The first shot shattered the front window. Rourke returned fire immediately, the rifle crack deafening in the enclosed space. Eliza heard a scream from outside. Someone hit, maybe killed. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire from all directions, bullets punching through walls, glass exploding. She fired the shotgun at shadows moving past the back window, the recoil slamming into her shoulder hard enough to bruise. Conserve ammunition, Rourke shouted. Only shoot when you've got a target. But targets were everywhere. Vane's men were moving in, using the darkness and their numbers to overwhelm. Eliza saw a man trying to climb through the shattered back window and fired point blank. He fell back screaming. She pumped the shotgun, hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. This was nothing like target practice. This was noise and terror and the smell of gunpowder choking the air. This was men trying to kill them and them trying to kill back. They're going for the barn. Rourke fired again. Trying to draw us out. Eliza risked a glance through the broken window. The rebuilt barn, smaller than before, barely finished, was burning. Again, Vane's favorite tactic. Let it burn, she said. It's just wood. But the barn wasn't their only problem. Someone was on the roof now. She could hear boots overhead, and then smoke started filtering down from above. They'd lit the house on fire. Roof's going, Rourke said, voice tight. We've got maybe 5 minutes before it collapses. The crawl space? Only option now. He fired twice more, covering her as she ran for the back bedroom. The loose board came up easily. Rourke had clearly prepared this escape route long before tonight. Below, darkness and the smell of earth. You first, he said. Together. They dropped into the narrow space, rifle and shotgun clutched awkwardly. The crawl space was barely 3 feet high, forcing them to crawl. Above, they could hear boots stomping through the house, men shouting. They're inside! Check every room! Eliza and Rourke crawled toward the opening under the porch, dirt and stones cutting their hands and knees. Behind them, the house groaned as fire took hold. The heat was intense, even down here, smoke filtering through floorboards. They emerged under the porch, pressed against the foundation. The yard was chaos. The house burning, men running, Vane shouting orders, but the trees were only 30 yards away. In the darkness and confusion, they might make it. On 3, Rourke whispered. We run for that big pine. Don't stop. Don't look back. What about them? She could see at least 4 men between them and the tree line. I'll handle them. You just run. Rourke. 1. He was already moving, rising from cover. 2. Eliza grabbed his arm. Wait! But he was already at 3, breaking from cover with a rebel yell that froze everyone for a critical second. He fired as he ran, not aiming for kills but for chaos, making Vane's men dive for cover. Eliza ran. She ran like she'd never run before, legs pumping, lungs burning, expecting a bullet between her shoulder blades every step. Behind her, gunfire exploded. She heard Rourke's rifle, heard men screaming, heard Vane bellowing orders. She made the tree line and dove behind the big pine, turning back to cover Rourke. He was still in the open, fighting 3 men hand to hand now, rifle abandoned. She raised the shotgun but couldn't shoot without hitting him. He took a punch to the jaw, staggered, came back with an elbow that dropped one attacker. Then someone shot him. Eliza saw him jerk, saw blood bloom on his shoulder. He went down hard. She screamed his name and ran back before thinking, shotgun up, firing at anything that moved. The blast caught one of Vane's men in the chest, threw him backward. She pumped and fired again, dropping another. Then she was at Rourke's side, trying to drag him up. He was conscious but dazed, blood soaking his shirt. "Told you to run," he gasped.
This story
Told you
was
we're
posted
partners.
on the channel west
She
of
got
the
him
trail.
upright, half
Please
carried,
do not
half dragged him
repost
toward
it
the
in any
trees.
form.
Bullets kicked up dirt around them. Someone was shooting systematically now, hurting them. They stumbled into the forest, darkness swallowing them, branches tearing at their clothes and skin. They crashed through underbrush for what felt like hours but was probably minutes, Eliza supporting most of Rourke's weight. Finally, they collapsed behind a fallen log, both gasping for air. "Let me see," Eliza said, pulling at his shirt. The wound was high on his shoulder, bleeding heavily but not spurting. Through and through, maybe. Or maybe the bullet was still in there. Hard to tell in the darkness. "It's bad," Rourke said. His voice was weaker than before. "It's fine. You're fine." She tore strips from her underskirt, pressed them against the wound. "Just stay conscious. Stay with me." Behind them, they could hear Vane's men searching, crashing through the forest. But the darkness was their ally now. The searchers had torches, making them easy to track and avoid. "We need to move," Rourke said. "Can't stay here." "You're bleeding." "I'll bleed slower if we're not dead." They moved deeper into the forest, following the ridge north toward the high country. Rourke's shoulder was worse than he'd admitted. She could feel him getting weaker, leaning on her more. But he kept going through sheer stubbornness, one foot in front of the other. Dawn found them 3 miles from the house, huddled in a rock shelter barely big enough for both of them. Eliza risked a small fire to warm water, cleaned Rourke's wound as best she could. The bullet had gone through clean, which was lucky, but the entry and exit wounds were ugly and already showing signs of infection. "We need a doctor," she said. "Town's 15 miles. Vane's men will be watching the roads." "Then we go around, through the mountains." Rourke looked at her like she was crazy. "That's 40 miles of rough country. I can barely walk as it is." "Then I'll help you walk." She finished binding the wound with strips of cloth. "We don't have a choice. If we stay here, either the infection kills you or Vane's men find us. Either way, you're dead." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but if I slow us down too much, you leave me and go for help." "Not a chance. Eliza," I said no. "We survive together or not at all." They rested until midday, then started moving again. The mountain road was brutal. Steep climbs, loose scree, places where Eliza had to basically carry Rourke across obstacles. His fever started by evening, making him delirious and weak. "Jacob?" he mumbled at one point. "That you?" "It's Eliza. Stay with me." "Couldn't save him. Couldn't prove it." "We proved it. The newspaper, remember? Everyone knows." "Everyone knows, but he's still dead." Rourke's eyes were glassy. "Should have killed Vane when I had the chance. Should have nothing. Rest now. Save your strength." They made barely 5 miles that first day. Eliza found another shelter as darkness fell, got a fire going, forced Rourke to drink water even though he fought her. The wound was definitely infected now, angry red lines spreading from the edges. She had nothing to treat it with. No medicine, no proper bandages, just water and desperation. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Rourke said suddenly. He was lying with his head in her lap, shivering despite the fire. "Why?" "Because I want to hear something besides my own death rattle." "You're not dying." "Tell me anyway." So she talked. Told him about the brick streets and gas lamps, the libraries and theaters.
This story was
the
posted
suffocating
on the channel
expectations
west of the
proper
trail.
society.
Please
Told
do
him
not
about
repost
teaching
it in
girls
any
who'd
form.
never be allowed to use their education, about dinner parties where women couldn't voice opinions, about the slow starvation of living someone else's idea of your life. "Sounds terrible," Rourke murmured. "It was. That's why I left." "But you had choices there, safety." "I had a cage. Out here I have—" She looked down at his fever-bright eyes. "Freedom, I guess. Even if it's the freedom to die in the mountains." He smiled weakly. "Some freedom. Better than the alternative." She held him through the night, keeping the fire going, monitoring his breathing. Twice he stopped breathing altogether and she had to shake him awake, terrified. By morning, he was barely conscious. They had to keep moving. Eliza got him upright through sheer force of will, supporting him as they stumbled along the ridge. She was exhausted, her own body screaming for rest, but stopping meant dying, and she wasn't ready for that. Not yet, not when they'd come this far. The second day was worse than the first. Rourke could barely walk now, his weight dragging them both down. Eliza's shoulders ached from supporting him, her legs trembled with fatigue. They covered maybe 3 miles before she had to stop, physically unable to go further. "Leave me," Rourke said. His voice was barely a whisper. "No. Please, you can make it alone. Get help." "And come back to find you dead? No!" She got the water skin, made him drink. "We're almost there, just a little further." It was a lie. They were nowhere close. But lies were all she had left. The third day they almost died. Eliza was so tired she wasn't watching the path carefully, and her foot slipped on loose rock. They both went down, sliding toward a drop-off that fell away into nothing. She grabbed a scrub pine with one hand, Rourke with the other, and held on while muscles screamed and gravity tried to kill them both. "Let go," Rourke said. "Save yourself. Shut up and climb." She hauled them both back from the edge through sheer, stubborn refusal to accept the alternative. They collapsed on solid ground, gasping. Eliza's hands were bleeding, torn by the rough bark. She didn't care. "We're not dying today," she said. "Do you hear me? We're not dying." Rourke looked at her with something like awe. "You're insane." "I'm determined. There's a difference." They made it another 2 miles before Eliza finally had to admit defeat. Rourke's fever was raging, his wound seeping despite her attempts to keep it clean. They needed help now, not after another day of struggling through mountains. She settled him in a sheltered spot, made sure he had water and the shotgun. "I'm going for help," she said. "Too dangerous." "So is staying here." She touched his face, burning hot. "I'll be back. I promise." "Eliza, I love you," she said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "In case I don't get another chance to say it, I love you, and I'm not letting you die." She ran before he could respond, ran before her courage failed, ran down the mountain toward Cedar Bluff, leaving pieces of herself with every step, exhaustion, fear, doubt, until all that was left was movement and will. She made it to the Beckham homestead by nightfall, collapsed on their porch more dead than alive. Mary found her there. "Eliza, sweet mercy, what happened?" "Rourke," Eliza gasped. "Shot. Infected. 3 miles up the ridge. Need doctor." David was already moving, hitching the wagon. "Where exactly?" She gave him landmarks, rough directions. "I'm coming with you." "You can barely stand." "I'm coming." They loaded the wagon with medical supplies, blankets, water. Picked up Doc Matthews in town despite his protests about the late hour and rough terrain. Then they headed into the darkness, racing against time and infection. They found Rourke where she'd left him, unconscious and burning with fever. Doc Matthews took one look at the wound and shook his head. "Should have brought him in days ago. This infection's bad." "Can you save him?" Eliza asked. "Maybe. If we get him to town, get this cleaned properly, fight the fever." He was already working, cleaning the wound with carbolic that made Rourke scream even unconscious. "But it's going to be close." They loaded him into the wagon, Eliza cradling his head in her lap. The ride back was endless, every jolt making Rourke moan, every mile feeling like 10. But they made it, got him into the doctor's office, laid him on the table under harsh lamplight. "Out," Doc Matthews said. "All of you. I need space to work." "I'm staying," Eliza said. "Mrs. Callahan, I am staying." The doctor looked at her bloody hands, her torn dress, her eyes that had seen too much. He nodded. "Then make yourself useful. Hold that lamp steady." She held the lamp while he cut away dead tissue, packed the wound with clean bandages, fought the infection with everything he had. Held it while Rourke thrashed and screamed, held it until her arms shook and her vision blurred. Finally, hours later, the doctor stepped back. "That's all I can do. Now we wait. Either the fever breaks, or it doesn't." "When will we know?" 24 hours. Maybe less. He looked at her seriously. "You should prepare yourself, Mrs. Callahan."
He's lost a lot of blood, and that infection's had days to spread. Even if he survives,
This
he might
story
not be
was
the same.
posted on the channel
He'll
west
survive,
of Betrayal.
Eliza said.
Please
with
do not
absolute
repost
certainty.
it in any form.
He's too stubborn to die. She stayed at his bedside, holding his hand, talking to him even though he couldn't hear. Told him about their future, about the children they'd have, about rebuilding the house and the barn. Told him everything she'd been too scared or too stubborn to say before. "You don't get to leave me now," she whispered.
Not after everything. Not when we finally figured out what we have. His hand was burning in hers. His breathing was shallow, rapid. But he was alive. That had to be enough. Morning came. The fever hadn't broken. Mary brought food, but Eliza couldn't eat. David brought news. Vane's men were looking for them, asking questions in town. The territorial marshal had finally arrived, demanding to investigate the fire and shooting. "What do we tell him?" David asked. "The truth," Eliza said. "Everything." Marshal Hendricks was a weathered man in his 50s, with eyes that had seen every kind of frontier violence. He listened to Eliza's story without interrupting, taking notes, his expression unreadable. "That's quite an accusation," he said when she finished. "It's not an accusation. It's what happened. You're saying Silas Vane burned your property and tried to kill you both. That's attempted murder." "Yes, based on a land dispute. Based on years of fraud and the murder of my husband's brother." Hendricks was quiet for a moment. "I read that newspaper story. Interesting piece, lots of allegations, but allegations aren't proof. We have proof. Survey records, witness statements, documentation of moved boundary markers." "Had proof," he corrected. "Your house burned down, didn't it? That evidence burned with it." Eliza's heart sank. "We made copies, sent them to the newspaper." "Copies aren't originals. Any lawyer worth his fee will tear them apart." He closed his notebook. "Look, Mrs. Callahan, I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm saying what I can prove and what I can convince a jury of are two different things." "So Vane gets away with it? With all of it? Unless you've got something concrete, witnesses who will testify, physical evidence that survived the fire, something more than your word against his, then yes, he probably does." Eliza wanted to scream, to rage, to break something. But underneath the fury was a cold, calculating part of her mind that was already thinking ahead. What if we could get him to confess? Hendricks looked skeptical. "How?" "I don't know yet, but give me time. Don't arrest him. Don't tip him off that you're investigating. Just wait." "For what?" "For justice." The marshal studied her for a long moment. "You've got 1 week. After that, I file my report with what I've got, which isn't much. Understand?" 1 week, Eliza agreed. Rourke's fever broke that afternoon. Eliza was dozing in the chair beside his bed when she felt his hand move in hers. She jerked awake to find him looking at her, weak but conscious and definitely alive. "Hey," he said, voice hoarse. She burst into tears. Hey. He tried to sit up, failed. I'm okay. You almost died, you stubborn fool." "But I didn't." He squeezed her hand. "Because you wouldn't let me." She kissed him, tasting salt tears and relief and a future that had almost slipped away. "We've got a week," she said when they finally broke apart. "A week for what?" "To make Vane confess." Rourke stared at her. "That's impossible."
This story was posted on the
So was
channel
carrying
west
you
of
40
Betrayal.
miles through the mountains.
Please do not
So was
repost
surviving
it in
3
any
days
form.
with Vane's men hunting us. So was this. She gestured between them. All of it impossible, and we did it anyway. A slow smile spread across his face. "What's your plan?" "I'm still working on it, but it starts with you getting better." "Then I better get started." He was out of bed in 3 days over Doc Matthews' protests, weak, still bandaged, but moving and thinking and ready to fight. They had 4 days left before the marshal filed his report. 4 days to do the impossible. Eliza spent those days talking to everyone who'd ever had trouble with Vane, building a network of people willing to help. The Beckhams, the Morrisons, families who'd lost land, families who'd been threatened. One by one, they agreed to her plan. It was risky. It might get them all killed, but doing nothing guaranteed Vane would win. On the 6th day, they put it in motion. Rourke walked into the Silver Dollar Saloon at noon, alone and unarmed, and called Silas Vane out in front of a dozen witnesses. The saloon went silent when Rourke walked through the doors. Eliza watched from across the street, hidden in the shadows of the general store awning, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. This was the most dangerous part of the plan, putting Rourke in the same room as the man who'd tried to kill him, unarmed and still healing, trusting that witnesses and daylight would be enough protection. It was insane, but they were out of options and out of time. Vane was at his usual table in the back, cards spread in front of him, whiskey at his elbow. He looked up when Rourke approached, and something like amusement crossed his face. "Callahan, heard you were dead." "Disappointed?" Rourke's voice carried through the silent room. "Surprised, more like. That was a hell of a fire. Hell of a mess." Vane gestured to an empty chair. "Sit. Have a drink. Let's talk like civilized men." "I'm not here to drink with you." "Then why are you here?" "Because if it's about that newspaper nonsense, I've got lawyers handling it. Defamation, they're calling it. Should make for an interesting court case." Rourke stayed standing, and Eliza could see the effort it cost him. His shoulder was still heavily bandaged under his shirt, his movements careful, but his voice was steady. "I'm here to give you one chance," he said, "one opportunity to do the right thing." Vane laughed. "The right thing according to who? You?" "According to the law. According to basic human decency." Rourke leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "You've been stealing land for years, moving survey markers, bribing officials, intimidating families who tried to fight back. You killed my brother when he got too close to exposing you, and when my wife and I tried to finish what Jacob started, you burned us out and tried to murder us both." The room was deadly quiet now. Every eye was on them. "Those are serious accusations," Vane said softly. "You got any proof?" "Enough. Survey records that don't match your claimed boundaries. Testimony from families you've defrauded. Physical evidence of moved markers." Rourke straightened. "And witnesses to your attack on my property." "Witnesses?" Vane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny. All I heard was you and your wife had an accident with a lamp. Tragic, really. House fires are so common out here." "Is that what you're telling people? That we burned our own house down?" "I'm saying accidents happen, especially to folks who make trouble." Vane took a sip of whiskey. "Like your brother. Like you. If you keep pushing." Across the street, Eliza felt ice in her veins. That was close. So close to a confession. But not quite there. Rourke must have felt it too, because he changed tactics. "My brother was a good man," he said quietly. "Better than either of us. He believed in doing things the right way, through proper channels. Believed people were fundamentally decent if you gave them the chance." "Sounds naive." "He was." Rourke's voice was rough. "He was naive and honest, and he trusted that presenting evidence to the territorial surveyor would be enough. That truth mattered. And look where it got him. Yeah, dead in the mountains, neck broken, because someone made sure he never made it to that meeting." Vane studied his cards. "Like I said, accidents happen. Except it wasn't an accident. His horse came back without a mark on it. No sign of a fall, no rocks disturbed, nothing to suggest he was thrown." Rourke's hands were fists now. "But there was a rope burn on one of the trees near where we found him. Like someone had strung a line across the trail at neck height." The detail was new, something Eliza hadn't heard before. She saw Vane's eyes narrow slightly, calculating. "You're making quite a story out of speculation," Vane said. "Am I? Because one of your men got drunk in Denver last month, started bragging about a job he did 4 years back, setting a horse trap for someone who was asking too many questions about property lines. This was the gamble. There was no drunk man in Denver, no confession in a bar. But Vane didn't know that. And men who did terrible things always wondered who else knew, who might talk." "Who told you that?" Vane's voice had gone cold. "Does it matter? Point is, your man talked, and now there's a record of it. You're lying." "Maybe, or maybe you've got a problem with loose ends." Rourke leaned in again. "Here's what I'm offering. Confess. Admit what you did, make restitution to the families you've stolen from, and I'll advocate for leniency. Prison instead of hanging." Vane laughed, but it sounded forced. You're in no position to offer me anything. I'm in the position of having nothing left to lose. You burned my home, shot me, tried to kill my wife. I've got no property, no assets, nothing you can take. But I've got truth, and I've got time, and I will spend every day I have left making sure everyone knows what you are. I'm a businessman who built an empire from nothing. You're a thief and a murderer, Rourke's voice carried to every corner of the room. And everyone in this room knows it. They've always known it. They just didn't have the courage to say it out loud. Vane stood slowly, his chair scraping back. You should be careful what you say, Callahan. Words have consequences. So do actions, like burning someone's property, like attempted murder. You can't prove any of that. Can I? Rourke smiled, and it was sharp as a knife. Funny thing about the fire, we had witnesses, families camped nearby who saw your men surrounding our property with torches, who heard you giving orders, who watched the whole thing happen. This was true. David Beckham and 2 other men had been positioned in the hills that night, too far away to help but close enough to see. Their testimony was already written out, signed, and in Marshall Hendrick's possession. Vane's face was turning red. Those are lies. Then why are you so angry? Innocent men don't get defensive. I'm angry because some jumped-up rancher and his schoolteacher wife think they can accuse me of crimes without consequences. No consequences? Rourke's voice went quiet, dangerous. My brother's dead. My home is ashes. My wife nearly died in the mountains because we had to run from your men. You want to talk about consequences? I'm living them. The 2 men stared at each other across the table, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Eliza held her breath, waiting. They needed Vane to lose his temper, to say something that couldn't be explained away. But Vane was too smart for that. He sat back down, picked up his cards, forced his expression back to neutral. This conversation is over, he said. Get out of my sight before I have you thrown out. Rourke didn't move. You killed my brother. I did no such thing. You gave the order. Maybe you didn't string that rope yourself, but you wanted him dead, and you made it happen. Prove it. I will. With what? Speculation and circumstantial evidence? Good luck with that. Vane gestured to his men, who'd been standing quietly by the bar. Escort Mr. Callahan outside, gently, of course. Wouldn't want any more accidents. 2 of Vane's men moved forward. Rourke tensed, and Eliza's hand went to the pistol hidden in her coat. This could turn bad fast. But then Marshall Hendrick stepped through the saloon doors. Nobody's escorting anyone, he said, his voice carrying authority. This is a public establishment, and Mr. Callahan has as much right to be here as anyone. Vane's face went carefully blank. Marshall, I heard you were in town. I'm sure you did. Hendricks walked to the bar, ordered a whiskey, his movements casual but his eyes sharp. Interesting conversation you gentlemen are having. Property rights, survey markers, tragic accidents. Very interesting. It's a private matter, Vane said. Murder's never private. Neither is arson. Hendricks took a sip of his drink. And before you say there's no proof, I've got testimony from 3 witnesses who saw your men burn the Callahan property. I've got documentation of survey fraud, and I've got a reporter's investigation that's being read in every major city between here and Washington. Newspaper stories aren't evidence. No, but they get people asking questions, important people, the kind who can make life difficult for territorial land barons with unclear titles. Hendricks set down his glass. I'd suggest you retain a lawyer, Mr. Vane. You're going to need one. Vane stood slowly.
This story was
you arresting
posted on
me?
the channel west of
Not yet.
Betrayal.
Still
Please
building
do not
my case,
repost it in
but
any
I'd advise
form.
you not to leave the territory. I'm not going anywhere. Vane's voice was ice. This is my home, my land, and I'm not letting some 2-bit marshal and a vendetta-obsessed rancher take it from me. Your land, Rourke repeated. See, that's the problem. A lot of it isn't yours. Never was. You just convinced everyone it was through fraud and fear. I have legal deeds, based on fraudulent surveys. Surveys conducted by licensed territorial surveyors. Surveyors you bribed. Rourke pulled a folded paper from his pocket, including this affidavit from Samuel Green, territorial surveyor, admitting that you paid him $500 to move boundary markers and falsify records. Eliza had to suppress a smile. Green's affidavit had been the hardest piece to get. The man was terrified of Vane, but she'd convinced him that testifying was safer than staying silent, that Vane's empire was crumbling, and he didn't want to be buried in the rubble. Vane's face went white, then red. Where did you get that? Same place I got the testimony from your ranch foreman about the night Jacob died. And the statements from 3 families documenting your threats and intimidation. Rourke spread the papers on the table. Should I keep going? Because I've got more. Those are forgeries. Then you won't mind if the marshal reviews them, compares signatures, verifies statements. Rourke looked at Hendricks. Will you? Be happy to, the marshal said. Vane was losing control now. Eliza could see it in the way his hands shook, the way his jaw clenched. He was a man used to dominating through fear and money, and neither was working anymore. You can't do this, Vane said. Already doing it. Rourke gathered the papers. See, here's what you never understood. You thought breaking me would be easy. Burn my property, kill my wife, and I'd fold. But you made a mistake. What mistake? You gave me nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world. Vane's hand moved toward his coat, and everyone saw it. The saloon erupted in motion, Hendricks drawing his pistol, Rourke diving sideways, Vane's men reaching for weapons. But Eliza was faster. She'd been waiting for this moment, positioned perfectly. The rifle she'd hidden in the alley across the street was already aimed, already steady. She didn't shoot, didn't need to. Just let Vane see her there, see the weapon, see the woman he'd tried to kill now holding his life in her hands. Their eyes met across the distance. Vane froze. I wouldn't, Eliza called. Her voice was calm, steady. The marshal's here. There are witnesses, and I've got a very good reason to put a bullet in you. Don't give me an excuse. Vane slowly removed his hand from his coat. Empty. Smart choice, Hendricks said, his pistol still drawn. Now, Mr. Vane, I think it's time we continued this conversation at my office. Officially. I want my lawyer. You're entitled to one. Soon as we get to Denver, you can have all the lawyers you want. Hendricks gestured. Let's go. You're arresting me? For attempted murder, arson, fraud, and suspicion of murder in the death of Jacob Callahan. That enough charges for you? Vane looked around the room at the faces watching him, looking for support, for someone to step up. But the men who'd backed him through fear were suddenly very interested in their drinks. The power he'd held through intimidation was evaporating like morning mist. This isn't over, he said. Yeah, it is, Rourke said quietly. It was over the moment you murdered my brother. Everything since then has just been you digging a deeper grave. Hendricks cuffed Vane and walked him toward the door. As they passed Rourke, Vane stopped. You think you've won, he said, voice low. But I've got friends, money, influence. I'll be out in a week, and when you are, I'll be waiting, Rourke interrupted, with more evidence, more witnesses, and the entire territory watching. You're done, Vane. Accept it. They took him away, and the saloon slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed, cards were dealt, drinks poured, but everyone kept glancing at Rourke standing alone in the middle of the room, looking like he'd just fought a war and wasn't sure if he'd won. Eliza came in through the front door, rifle still in hand. The crowd parted for her, and she walked straight to Rourke and wrapped her arms around him. It's done, she said. He held her tight, and she felt him shaking, relief or delayed shock or both. Not quite, he said. Still have to make it stick. Trial, conviction, all of that. We will. You sound pretty confident for someone who was holding a rifle on a man 30 seconds ago. I'm confident because I know we're right, and I know that truth matters, even out here. He pulled back to look at her. When did you become such an optimist? When I married a stubborn rancher who taught me that some things are worth fighting for. They left the saloon together, walking into afternoon sunlight that felt brighter somehow. The street was quiet, normal, like the world hadn't just shifted. But it had. They both felt it. The trial came 3 months later in Denver. The territorial government, embarrassed by the newspaper coverage and pressure from federal officials, expedited the proceedings. Vane hired the best lawyers money could buy, men in expensive suits who tried every legal maneuver to dismiss the charges. But Eliza and Rourke had spent those 3 months building an unassailable case. They'd tracked down every family Vane had defrauded, documented every moved survey marker, compiled testimony from workers who'd been coerced into illegal activities. Harrison Grant published follow-up articles detailing each new revelation, keeping public pressure high. The prosecution presented a pattern of systematic fraud spanning 2 decades: property theft, witness intimidation, bribery of public officials, and 2 murders, Jacob Callahan and a homesteader named Thomas Morrison, who disappeared 5 years earlier after challenging Vane's boundary claims. They'd found Morrison's body that spring, buried in the high country with a bullet in his skull. Vane's lawyers argued circumstantial evidence, questioned witness credibility, claimed their client was a victim of jealous competitors, but the sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming. Surveyor Green's testimony was particularly damaging. He broke down on the stand, admitting to years of fraud, naming specific instances where Vane had ordered him to falsify records. The ranch foreman testified next, a broken man who'd carried the weight of Jacob's murder for 4 years. He described how Vane had ordered the killing, how they'd made it look like a riding accident, how they'd disposed of evidence. His testimony was detailed, devastating, impossible to dismiss. Eliza watched from the gallery, Rourke beside her, as the prosecution systematically dismantled Vane's defense. She saw the moment the jury turned, saw the shift in their expressions from skepticism to certainty, saw justice taking shape in real time. Vane never testified. His lawyers advised against it, knowing he'd incriminate himself. Instead, he sat silent and stone-faced, watching his empire crumble in a Denver courtroom. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison for the murders, with additional time for fraud and arson. No possibility of parole. He'd die behind bars, his wealth confiscated, his legacy destroyed. When they read the verdict, Vane finally looked at Rourke. There was no remorse in his eyes, no regret, just cold hatred and the bitter understanding that he'd lost. Rourke held his gaze steadily, and Eliza saw something release in her husband's expression. 4 years of grief, of rage, of unanswered questions, all of it settling into something closer to peace. "For Jacob," he said quietly. They walked out of the courthouse into a Denver evening, free in a way they hadn't been since the day they married. The weight they'd carried, the fear, the constant vigilance, the knowledge that someone wanted them dead, lifted. "What now?" Eliza asked. Rourke looked at her, and his smile was genuine for the first time in months. "Now we go home, build a new barn, fix the house, start over." "Start over," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." They stayed in Denver another week, handling legal matters. The territorial government returned the land Vane had stolen, not just to Rourke, but to every family he'd defrauded. Hundreds of acres, properly surveyed and legally documented. It wasn't enough to erase the damage, but it was something. Harrison Grant published one final article, titled "Justice in Cedar Valley: How 2 People Brought Down an Empire." It ran in newspapers across the country, and suddenly Eliza and Rourke were famous. People they'd never met sent letters of support, congratulations, requests for interviews. Eliza hated it. "I just want to go home," she told Rourke one evening after declining yet another interview request. "I don't want to be a symbol or an inspiration. I want to teach school and raise cattle and live a boring, normal life." "After everything we've been through, boring sounds pretty good," he agreed. They left Denver on a Tuesday morning, their wagon loaded with lumber and supplies. The territorial government had provided compensation
This
for their
story was
destroyed
posted
property,
on the channel
not
west
nearly
of
enough to cover
Betrayal.
the losses,
Please do
but
not
something,
repost it in any
enough to
form.
rebuild. The valley looked different when they returned. Spring had come fully, turning everything green and alive. Their property sat empty, the burned house and barn just charred foundations, but the land itself was untouched. Still beautiful, still home. They camped on the property that first night, sleeping under stars, making plans. "New house there," Rourke said, pointing to a slight rise. "Better drainage, better view." "Barn there," Eliza added. "Close enough to reach in bad weather, far enough to not smell it from the house. Garden plot there, chicken coop there, root cellar there." They were sketching out their future in words and gestures, rebuilding with intention instead of desperation. "We should add a room," Eliza said suddenly. "For what?" She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "For this. Rourke went absolutely still. You're, about 3 months, the doctor thinks. Due in November. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with tears. A baby, he said, wonder in his voice. We're having a baby. We are. Everything I've been through, everything we've survived, and this, he shook his head. This is what breaks me. Breaks you? In the best way. He kissed her, gentle and reverent. You're giving me a future, Eliza. A real one. Not just survival, but an actual life worth living. We're giving each other that, she corrected. They started building the next day. David Beckham showed up with his sons, ready to help. Then the Morrisons, the Fletchers, the Grants, families who'd lived under Vane's shadow for years and were now free to be neighbors instead of victims. They raised walls together, fitted beams, laid foundations. Within a month, the frame of a new house stood solid and square. The whole valley seemed to be rebuilding, not just physically, but spiritually. Without Vane's influence, people relaxed. Families who'd been too scared to visit now came for Sunday dinners. The schoolhouse filled with students whose parents could finally spare them from field work. Eliza resumed teaching, though she had to adjust as her pregnancy advanced. By August, she was visibly showing, and the children were fascinated. Will the baby learn to read too? Sarah Beckham asked one day. Eventually, Eliza said. Probably starting with you teaching them, since you'll be old enough by then. Sarah beamed with pride and responsibility. The house was finished in September, just before the first snow. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, solid and weathertight. They moved in on a Sunday, carrying their few possessions up the porch steps, claiming rooms, making it theirs. That night, lying in their new bed in their new house, Rourke pulled Eliza close. I never thought I'd have this, he said. A home, a wife, a baby coming. After Jacob died, I thought my life was over, just existed to get revenge and then nothing. And now? Now I've got everything. He kissed her forehead. You gave me that. You and your stubborn refusal to give up. We gave each other that, she said again. I was dying alone in that soddy, and you offered me a way out. This partnership, this marriage, this life. We built it together. November came cold and early. Eliza went into labor on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks before the doctor expected. Rourke rode for Mary Beckham while Eliza tried not to panic. First babies were unpredictable, she knew that, but knowing didn't make it less terrifying. Mary arrived with supplies and calm competence, taking charge of the situation. You've survived worse than this, she told Eliza during a contraction. You can do this. Labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Long, painful, exhausting hours where Eliza alternated between certainty she was dying and determination to survive. Rourke stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, talking her through contractions, being the steady presence she needed. The baby came just after dawn. A girl, perfect and furious, announcing her arrival with lung power that suggested she'd inherited her parents' stubbornness. Eliza held her daughter and wept, overwhelmed by love and relief and the sheer impossibility that something this small and beautiful could exist. What should we name her? Rourke asked, touching the baby's tiny hand with awe. Eliza thought about everything they'd survived, everyone who'd helped them, about the brother who'd started their fight for justice, about the people who'd stood with them. Hope, she said. Her name is Hope. Winter settled over the valley, but inside their new house, warmth and life flourished. Hope proved to be a demanding baby, colicky, loud, frequently unhappy with the state of the world. But she was theirs, and they loved her with the fierce devotion of people who'd fought for the right to build a family. Rourke was a natural father, patient and gentle in ways that surprised even him. Eliza watched him walking the floor at 2 a.m, singing off-key lullabies, and felt her heart expand past what she'd thought possible. News came in February that Vane had died in prison. Pneumonia, the letter said, though rumors suggested it was less natural than that. Prison was hard on men who'd wielded power through fear. His fellow inmates had long memories and scores to settle. Eliza expected to feel triumph or relief, but mostly she just felt tired. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back Jacob or undo the damage Vane had done. It could only prevent future harm. "Is it wrong that I don't feel anything?" she asked Rourke. "No," he said. "He's already taken enough from us. Don't give him your emotions too." Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, revealing a valley reborn. Families planted crops on land that was legally theirs now. Children played without the shadow of fear. Cedar Bluff grew from a collection of frightened homesteaders into an actual community. Eliza reopened the school in April, bringing hope in a basket while she taught. The older girls took turns watching her, delighted to help. Sarah Beckham proved to be a natural with babies, patient and competent. "You're going to make a good teacher someday," Eliza told her. "Like you?" "Better than me. You'll have actual training instead of just stubborn determination." The first anniversary of their marriage came in May. Rourke surprised her by closing the school early and taking her to the spot where he'd first proposed, the soddy where she'd lived alone, now abandoned and slowly returning to earth. "I stood here a year ago," he said, "and offered you the coldest, most unromantic proposal in history. A business arrangement, I called it. Separate rooms and mutual survival." "I remember. I was an idiot." She laughed. "Yes, you were. But you said yes anyway." He took her hands. "Why?" "Because I was out of options and terrified of another winter alone. Because you offered safety and I was desperate." She paused. "And because even then I saw something in you, something decent and honest underneath all the walls you'd built. I didn't deserve you. You deserved a chance. We both did." She touched his face. "Look at us now. We're not just surviving anymore. We're living." He kissed her there, in front of the soddy where she'd been slowly dying of loneliness, and it felt like closing one chapter and opening another. They rode home together as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple. Hope was with Mary Beckham for the evening, giving them rare time alone. They made love in their new house, in the bed they'd built together, with the future spread out before them like a promise. Afterward, lying tangled together, Rourke said, "I want more." "More?" "More children, more life, more everything." He pulled her closer. "I want to fill this house with kids and noise and chaos. I want to grow old with you, watch our children have children, build something that lasts beyond us." That's a lot of want for a man who proposed a business arrangement. That man was a fool who didn't know what he needed. He kissed her shoulder. "This man knows exactly what he wants. And it's you, and this life, and every moment we can steal from the world." Eliza felt tears on her face, happy ones this time. "Then let's steal them all." 2 years later, they had a son, then another daughter, then twins who arrived early and kept them up for what felt like solid years. The house filled with children and laughter and the beautiful chaos Rourke had wanted. The valley prospered. With Vane gone, legitimate businesses moved in. A real school was built, proper and permanent, and Eliza taught there while Rourke managed their expanding ranch. The land he'd inherited from Jacob, combined with the parcels returned by the territorial government, made them one of the larger operations in the valley. But they never lost sight of where they'd come from. The desperation, the fear, the knowledge that survival wasn't guaranteed. They helped new families settling in the territory, offering advice and assistance. Started a lending library with Eliza's books as the foundation. Built a community hall where people could gather without fear. Sarah Beckham did become
This
a
story
teacher,
was posted
studying
on the
at the
channel
normal
west
school in
of
Denver
Betrayal.
and returning
Please
to
do
open
not
a second
repost
school
it
in the
in any
valley.
form.
She was everything Eliza had hoped, smart, dedicated, determined to give her students opportunities she'd had to fight for. Harrison Grant visited occasionally, chronicling the valley's transformation from Vane's kingdom into something better. His articles painted a picture of frontier justice and community resilience that became required reading in Eastern schools. And through it all, Eliza and Rourke built their marriage into something neither had imagined possible. Not perfect. They still fought about stupid things, still drove each other crazy, still had moments of doubt and frustration. But underneath was a foundation of trust and partnership that had been forged in fire and survived. On their 10th anniversary, Rourke took her back to the spot where they'd married. The courthouse was the same, weathered but standing. The clerk who'd witnessed their ceremony was long gone, but the records remained. "I want to do this again," Rourke said. Get married? Renew our vows, but properly this time, with the community and our children and everything we should have had the first time. So they did, and the church Cedar Bluff had finally built, with their 4 children watching and the entire valley attending. Eliza wore a real wedding dress, white and beautiful. Rourke wore his best suit, nervous as a boy despite 10 years of marriage. When the preacher asked if he took this woman, Rourke's voice rang clear. I do. For partnership and love, for struggle and triumph, for every day we're given and every challenge we face. I do. Eliza's vows were simpler. I came to this valley alone and afraid, and you offered me shelter. I thought I was accepting survival, but you gave me life. You gave me hope and family and a future worth fighting for. For all of that and everything we'll build together, I do. They kissed as husband and wife for the second time, and it felt both familiar and brand new. The celebration lasted all day, food and dancing and storytelling. Their children ran wild with the other valley kids. Old friends shared memories. New neighbors made toasts. It was everything a wedding should be, filled with joy instead of desperation. That night, alone finally, they stood on their porch watching the stars. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Eliza asked. If you hadn't proposed, if I'd said no, if any of it had gone differently. Every day, Rourke admitted. And then I look at what we have and think about how close we came to missing it. We didn't miss it, though. We fought for it. We did. He pulled her close. Best fight I ever picked. Even better than the one against Vane. That was about justice. This is about love. No comparison. They stood there together, 2 people who'd started as strangers in a marriage of convenience and built something extraordinary from desperation and will. The valley spread below them, peaceful and prosperous. Their children slept safe inside. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but theirs to shape. It wasn't the life either had imagined. It was better, because they'd earned it together, survived it together, built it together from nothing but stubbornness and hope and the refusal to give up on each other. And that, Eliza thought, was worth every hardship they'd faced. Every moment of fear and doubt and pain had led here, to this porch, this man, this life. And she wouldn't change a single second of it. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were theirs. That was the truth Eliza came to understand somewhere between their 10th anniversary and the day Hope turned 18. Life didn't magically become simple just because you'd won a few battles. The land was still hard, the winters still brutal, the work still endless. But there was a difference between surviving and living, and they'd learned to tell them apart. The ranch grew steadily under Rourke's management, but growth brought new problems. Hired hands to manage, payroll to meet, equipment that broke at the worst possible times. He came home exhausted most nights, smelling of cattle and sweat, too tired to do more than eat and collapse into bed. I thought it would get easier, he admitted one evening after a particularly brutal day dealing with a fence break that had let 30 head scatter into the high country. Thought once we got established, once we had help, it wouldn't be such a grind. Eliza looked up from the essay she was grading. Their youngest, Thomas, was finally asleep after an hour of fighting bedtime. Her own day had been spent managing a schoolhouse full of children at varying levels, breaking up fights, teaching everything from basic letters to advanced mathematics. Her head ached. Nothing worthwhile is easy, she said. You taught me that. Did I? Must have been having a philosophical moment. You said it the day you proposed. Said you weren't offering easy, just honest. He smiled tiredly. Sounds like something I'd say when I was trying to convince a woman to marry me out of desperation. Worked, didn't it? Best con I ever pulled. She threw a wadded paper at him, and he caught it, laughing. These small moments, exhausted jokes after hard days, had become the texture of their marriage. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just 2 people choosing each other repeatedly in the mundane grind of daily life. The children were growing up wild and stubborn, which probably shouldn't have surprised anyone given their parents. Hope, at 18, was already talking about attending the women's college that had opened in Denver. She had her mother's sharp mind and her father's refusal to be told what she couldn't do. I want to study law, she announced one dinner, as casually as if she'd suggested a new dress. Rourke nearly choked on his coffee. Law? Yes. I want to help people like us, families who get cheated by men with more power and money. She met her father's eyes steadily. I want to finish what Uncle Jacob started. Eliza felt her throat tighten. Hope had grown up hearing stories about the brother she'd never met, about the fight for justice that had nearly killed her parents. Of course she'd want to continue that work. Law school's expensive, Rourke said carefully, and hard. They don't exactly welcome women with open arms. I know. That's why I need to go. Hope's jaw was set in a way that reminded Eliza of herself at that age. Someone has to be first. Might as well be me. They sent her to Denver that fall with equal parts pride and terror. Watching their daughter ride away toward a future they couldn't control or protect her from was harder than anything they'd faced together. Eliza cried for 3 days straight. She'll be fine, Rourke said, holding her. She's got your brains and my stubbornness. That's a dangerous combination. That's what I'm afraid of. But Hope thrived. She sent letters full of intellectual excitement and righteous anger about the barriers women faced. She fought for her place in every class, won most of her arguments, made enemies and allies with equal enthusiasm. Reading her letters was like watching a younger, fiercer version of Eliza take on the world. The twins, James and Jacob, named for Rourke's lost brother, were 15 and already working the ranch full-time. They had their father's build and their mother's analytical minds, a combination that made them frighteningly competent. Eliza watched them ride out with Rourke each morning and saw the future of the ranch taking shape. You ever worry they don't have a choice? She asked Rourke one evening. That they're just doing this because it's expected? I worry all the time, he admitted, but I also see how they light up talking about breeding programs and water rights. That's not obligation, that's genuine interest. Or very good acting. They're 15-year-old boys. If they were acting interested in anything besides girls in trouble, I'd be shocked. Their middle daughter, Grace, was 13 and spent every spare moment drawing. Sketches of the valley, portraits of neighbors, detailed studies of horses and cattle. She'd covered every available wall in the house with her work, transforming their home into an accidental gallery. I want to go to art school, she said one day, testing the words. Eliza looked at the drawing Grace had just finished, a landscape of the valley at sunset, so beautiful it hurt. Then you should. Even if it means leaving? Especially if it means leaving. This valley will always be here. Your dreams might not wait. Grace hugged her fiercely, and Eliza thought about the girl she'd been at 13, trapped in Philadelphia's society, already knowing she wanted something different but unable to name it. At least her daughters would have choices, would know that wanting more than what was offered wasn't a character flaw. Thomas, their youngest at 11, was the mystery. Quiet where his siblings were loud, thoughtful, where they were impulsive. He spent hours reading Eliza's books, asking questions that suggested he was processing more than anyone realized. What do you want to be when you grow up? Eliza asked him one afternoon. He thought about it seriously. I don't know yet, but I think I want to help people, like you and Papa did, stopping Mr. Vane. That was a long time ago, but it mattered. You made things better. He looked at her with eyes too old for his face. I want to do that too. Make things better. Eliza pulled him close, this sensitive child who'd been born into peace but understood the cost of achieving it. Then you will. And we'll help you however we can. The seasons turned, as they always did. Another winter,
This story
another
was posted
spring,
on the channel
endless
west
cycle
of
planting
Betrayal.
and harvest
Please
and
do not
survival.
repost it
But
in any
somewhere in
form.
that repetition, something shifted. The valley wasn't just surviving anymore, it was prospering. New families arrived regularly now, drawn by stories of good land and honest community. The railroad was talking about extending a line through the territory, which would change everything. Progress, Rourke said, watching surveyors mark potential routes through the valley. Whether we want it or not. You sound like you're grieving, Eliza observed. Maybe I am. This place was wild when I got here, dangerous and beautiful, and mine in a way nothing else had ever been. He gestured at the growing town, the new buildings, the surveyor stakes. Now it's becoming civilized, which is good, but also means it's not yours anymore. It's everyone's. Yeah. She understood. There was something about the early days, the hardship and isolation and constant danger, that had made everything feel more vivid, more real. Success and stability were wonderful, but they came with a kind of softness that felt strange after so many years of sharp edges. "We're getting old," she said. "Speak for yourself." "I'm in my prime." "You groaned getting out of bed this morning." That was a manly groan of satisfaction. She laughed, and it felt good. They'd earned their gray hair and aching joints, earned the right to groan getting out of bed. They'd survived things that should have killed them and built something that would outlast them both. Sarah Beckham, now Sarah Grant, having married Harrison Grant's younger brother, came by one afternoon with a proposal. "I want to write a book," she said, "about the early days of the Valley, the fight against Vane, the families who built this community, all of it, and I want to include your story." Eliza's immediate instinct was to refuse. Their story felt private, personal, not something to be displayed for strangers. "Why?" she asked. "Because it matters. Because young women need to know that they don't have to accept the hand they're dealt, that they can fight for something better, even when everyone says it's impossible." Sarah's eyes were earnest. "Your story did that for me. Made me believe I could be more than just a rancher's daughter." "Our story wasn't heroic," Eliza said. "It was desperate people making desperate choices and getting lucky. That's exactly why it matters. You weren't saints or heroes. You were real people who refused to give up." Sarah leaned forward. "Let me tell it, please." Eliza looked at Rourke, who shrugged. "It's your story too," he said. "Your choice." She thought about Hope fighting for her place in law school, about Grace dreaming of art school, about Thomas wanting to make things better, about all the young women who might need to know that survival wasn't the only option available to them. "All right," she said, "but you tell the truth. All of it. The fear, the mistakes, the times we almost gave up. No mythologizing, no making us better than we were." "Deal." Sarah's book came out 2 years later, and it was everything Eliza had feared and hoped for. Honest, unflinching, presenting them as flawed people who'd stumbled toward justice rather than marching confidently toward it. The reviews were mixed. Some praised its authenticity, others criticized its lack of romance and heroic narrative, but the letters came anyway. Women writing from all over the country, sharing their own stories of survival and struggle, thanking Eliza for proving that you didn't have to be perfect to fight for what was right, that marriage could be partnership instead of ownership, that the frontier wasn't just for men. Reading those letters, Eliza finally understood why their story mattered, not because they'd been extraordinary, but because they'd been ordinary people who refused to accept that ordinary meant powerless. Hope graduated from law school third in her class, despite facing discrimination at every turn. She opened a practice in Denver, specializing in property rights and women's issues, taking on cases others wouldn't touch. Eliza watched her daughter argue before judges and juries with fierce competence and felt something like awe. "She's better than I ever was," she told Rourke. "She learned from the best. She learned from experience, from watching her mother fight for every inch of respect and recognition." He put his arm around her. "You gave her that. The knowledge that she could." Grace got her scholarship to art school in San Francisco, where she scandalized instructors and delighted patrons in equal measure. Her paintings of frontier life, honest, unglamorous, beautiful in their rawness, started appearing in galleries. The twins took over daily ranch operations, freeing Rourke to focus on expansion and improvement. Thomas, surprising everyone, announced he wanted to study medicine. "The Valley needs a real doctor," he said. "Not someone who comes through twice a year, someone who lives here, knows the people, cares about them." They were all leaving, all building lives beyond the Valley, and Eliza felt the bittersweet ache of successful parenting. You raised them to fly, and then watched them go. The ranch house grew quieter. Just the two of them again, circling back to where they'd started. Except now they knew each other, knew every story and scar and secret. Knew how to fight and how to forgive, how to give each other space and when to close the distance. "I never thanked you," Rourke said one evening. They were on the porch again. They'd spent half their marriage on this porch, watching the valley change and grow. "For saying yes, for taking a chance on a broken man with a vendetta and too much land. You weren't broken, just bent. Semantics. Important ones. She took his hand. And you never thanked me because you didn't have to. We saved each other. That's what partnership means. He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over mountains they'd crossed together, through snow and fear and desperation. The valley spread below them, dotted with lights from homes and businesses and lives they'd helped make possible.
Do you ever regret it? He asked. Any of it? Eliza thought about the question seriously. The hunger and fear of those early years. The terror of fighting vain. The endless work and occasional failures. The children who'd broken her heart by growing up and leaving. No, she said finally. Even the hard parts, even the times I thought we wouldn't make it, I don't regret any of it, because it brought me here, to you, to this life, to everything we built. Even when I was being a stubborn ass? Especially then. Your stubbornness saved us more than once. He laughed quietly. So did yours. They were both in their 50s now, which felt impossibly old some days and impossibly young others. Old enough to see the shape of their lives clearly, young enough to want more time to live it. The ranch would go to the twins eventually. The house would fill with grandchildren. The cycle would continue. But tonight was theirs. Winter came hard that year, the kind of winter that reminded them why they'd learned to prepare obsessively. The pass closed early, snow piling in drifts that swallowed fences and turned the world white and silent. They were alone again, cut off from everything, just two people in a house and the endless work of survival. Except it didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like life. They fell back into old patterns, Rourke handling livestock, Eliza managing the house, both of them working together to keep the ranch running, but now there was ease to it, a rhythm born of decades of practice. They didn't need to talk to coordinate. They just moved together, knowing what needed doing and how to do it efficiently. On the longest night of winter, sitting by the fire with the wind howling outside, Eliza found herself thinking about that scared woman in the Saudi, the one who'd been so close to giving up, so tired of being alone, the one who'd said yes to a stranger's proposal because she had no other options. What are you thinking about? Rourke asked. Us. That first winter. How terrified I was. Of me? Of everything. The isolation, the cold, the fact that I'd married someone I didn't know and might never love. She looked at him. I was so stupid. You were surviving. I was barely existing. There's a difference. She shifted closer. You gave me a reason to live instead of just exist. Even when I was furious with you, even when we were fighting about dishes and firewood and stupid things, I was alive. Really alive for the first time in years. He kissed her temple. You did the same for me. I was just going through motions, waiting to get enough evidence to take down Vane. And then what? Die in the attempt? Didn't much care either way. His arm tightened around her. And then you showed up, stubborn and fierce and refusing to let me wallow, and suddenly I had a reason to survive the attempt. We're quite a pair. Damn right we are. They sat in comfortable silence, and Eliza thought about all the versions of themselves they'd been. Strangers negotiating a marriage contract, reluctant partners learning to coexist, friends discovering they liked each other, lovers finding passion in unexpected places, parents raising children and building legacy. And now, full circle, just two people who'd chosen each other and kept choosing each other through everything. Spring came eventually. It always did. The children returned for a
This
visit.
story was
all five of
posted
them,
on the
plus
channel
Hope's new
West of
husband,
Betrayal.
a lawyer she
Please
met
do
in
not
Denver who
repost
looked
it in any
appropriately
form.
terrified of his formidable wife. The house filled with noise and chaos, and the particular kind of exhaustion that came from hosting adult children who'd forgotten how small their childhood home actually was. Hope and her husband announced they were expecting. Grace had sold 3 paintings to a gallery in New York. The twins were experimenting with a new breeding program. Thomas had been accepted to medical school in Chicago. All of them successful, building their own lives, carrying forward the values their parents had fought to instill. Watching them around the dinner table, laughing and arguing and telling stories, Eliza felt something settle in her chest. This was what they'd fought for. Not just justice or land or survival, but this. A family that felt safe being loud, that knew how to disagree without destroying each other, that understood love could coexist with honesty. After dinner, Hope pulled Eliza aside. "I've been working on something," she said. "A case involving mineral rights and indigenous land claims. It's complicated, and the other side has deep pockets. Sounds familiar." "That's what I thought." Hope's eyes were bright. "I keep thinking about you and Papa, taking on Vane, when everyone said it was impossible. How did you find the courage?" Eliza thought about it. "We didn't, really. We just didn't have a choice. Or rather, we decided that the consequences of not fighting were worse than the consequences of trying and failing. What if I fail?" "Then you fail, but you'll know you tried." Eliza took her daughter's hands. "The only real failure is not trying because you're afraid. Everything else is just learning." Hope hugged her fiercely. "Thank you. For showing me what fighting looks like. For being the kind of woman who doesn't back down." After the children left, the house felt emptier than before. But it was a different kind of empty than that first winter. Not lonely, just quiet. The silence of a life well lived rather than a life being endured. Rourke found Eliza in Jacob's old room, looking at the shelf where they kept his ledger and the documentation that had brought down Vane. "Thinking about him?" Rourke asked. "About all of it. How many times we almost died, almost lost everything. How close we came to giving up." But we didn't. No, we didn't." She turned to face him. "And I think that's the point. Not that we were heroic or special, but that we were stubborn enough to keep going when quitting would have been easier." "You think that's what people need to hear?" "I think it's what I needed to hear, back when I was alone in that soddy wondering if I had the strength for one more winter." She touched the ledger gently. Jacob was right. Truth matters. Justice matters. But you have to be willing to fight for them, even when the odds are terrible and success seems impossible. Think the next generation understands that? Hope does. Thomas does. All of them, in their own ways. She smiled. They're going to change the world. Our stubborn, fierce children who refuse to accept that things have to stay the way they've always been. Takes after their mother. And their father. They stood there together in the quiet room, honoring the ghost of a man whose murder had set all of this in motion. Jacob would never know that his death hadn't been in vain, that his documentation had eventually brought down the man who killed him, that his nephew and nieces were carrying forward his belief in justice and truth. But Eliza knew, and that would have to be enough. The years continued their march. Rourke's hair went white, his hands gnarled from decades of hard work. Eliza's eyes weakened until she needed spectacles for reading. Her back ached from years of carrying children and responsibilities and the weight of fighting for what was right. They slowed down, delegated more to the twins, spent more time on the porch watching sunsets than working until exhaustion. Age came for everyone eventually, and they welcomed it as the price of having lived long enough to grow old together. Hope's first child was born on a spring morning, and Eliza held her granddaughter with shaking hands and a full heart. Another generation, another chance to do better, to build on the foundation they'd laid. "What will you name her?" Eliza asked. Hope looked at her husband, who nodded. "Eliza, after her grandmother. The woman who taught me that strength doesn't mean never being afraid. It means being terrified and doing it anyway." Eliza wept, and this time it was pure joy. The ranch thrived under the twins' management, expanding in ways Rourke had never imagined. They were smarter than he'd been, more strategic, willing to take calculated risks. The Callahan Ranch became known throughout the territory for quality livestock and honest dealing. Grace's paintings hung in galleries from San Francisco to New York, raw and beautiful depictions of frontier life that captured something essential about the American West. She'd made a name for herself without compromise, creating art that was unapologetically honest about hardship and beauty existing simultaneously. Thomas graduated medical school and returned to the Valley, setting up a proper clinic with modern equipment and trained nurses. He treated everyone regardless of ability to pay, earning the same kind of loyalty his parents had built through different means. They'd done it. Raised children who were changing the world in their own ways, who'd taken the lessons of survival and struggle and transformed them into something productive and good. One evening, 25 years after that first desperate winter, Eliza and Rourke sat on their porch watching the sun set over the valley they'd fought for. "No regrets?" Rourke asked. It had become their ritual question over the years. One, Eliza said. He looked at her, surprised. What? I regret that I didn't say yes sooner, that we wasted those first few months circling each other instead of just admitting what we were becoming. We weren't ready. Maybe not, but I still regret the lost time. She took his hand. We got decades together, which is more than we had any right to expect, but it still wasn't enough. It's never going to be enough. He kissed her, and it was sweet and familiar and everything they'd built together. Then we better make the most of whatever time we've got left. Agreed. They were both 70 when Rourke had his first stroke. It was mild, leaving him weak on one side, but still himself, still sharp and stubborn, and determined not to be an invalid. Thomas treated him with professional competence and filial terror, hovering like a mother hen until Rourke threatened to throw medical equipment at him. I'm fine, Rourke insisted, his words slightly slurred. You're not fine, Eliza said firmly. You're recovering. There's a difference. Semantics. Important ones. He smiled at the echo of their old argument, and she saw the boy he'd been underneath the old man he'd become. Still fighting, still refusing to quit. They adjusted. Rourke learned to work within his new limitations, accepting help grudgingly, but accepting it nonetheless. Eliza took over more of the daily management, coordinating with the twins, handling correspondence, keeping the ranch running. It should have felt like defeat, this gradual surrender to age and infirmity, but mostly it just felt like life, taking what came and adapting to it. Rourke recovered enough to walk with a cane, to sit on the porch and offer advice even if he couldn't do the physical work anymore. Eliza's hands developed arthritis that made grading papers painful, so she finally retired from teaching, passing the school on to a young woman who reminded her of herself at that age, fierce and determined and slightly terrified. They settled into a new rhythm, slower but no less meaningful. Mornings on the porch with coffee, afternoons reading or receiving visitors, evenings watching the valley they'd helped build prosper without them. We're obsolete, Rourke said one day, not sadly, but as an observation. We're retired. There's a difference. Is there? The ranch runs fine without me. The school does better without you trying to teach students who've moved beyond what you know. That's not obsolete, that's success. Eliza set down her book. We built something that doesn't need us to survive. That was always the goal. Still feels strange. Everything worthwhile feels strange at first. The grandchildren visited regularly, and great-grandchildren were starting to appear. The house filled periodically with noise and chaos, and the particular exhaustion that came from hosting multiple generations at once. Eliza loved it, and was relieved when they left, both things simultaneously true. Hope's daughter, young Eliza, came to visit alone one summer. She was 16, serious and thoughtful, carrying the weight of expectations that came with being named after a grandmother she was supposed to emulate. How did you know what was right? She asked one evening. When you were fighting Mr. Vane, how did you know you weren't just being stubborn and stupid? Eliza laughed. I didn't. Half the time I was convinced we were going to die for nothing, but I knew what was wrong, and I knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to fix it. What if you'd been wrong? About what? Whether Vane was stealing land. We had evidence. Whether fighting him was worth the risk. That's a different question. She looked at her granddaughter seriously. Some things are worth dying for. The hard part is figuring out which
This
things
story
those
was
are.
posted on the channel
How do you
west of
figure it out?
Betrayal.
You
Please
don't
do not
really.
repost
You just
it in
decide
any
what you
form.
can live with and what you can't, and you act accordingly. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, but at least you're acting with intention instead of just letting life happen to you. Young Eliza thought about that. Mama says I should study law like her, but I want to study engineering, build things, make them work better. Then study engineering. But Mama, your mother fought like hell to have choices. She'd be a hypocrite if she tried to take yours away. Eliza squeezed her granddaughter's hand. Be an engineer. Be extraordinary at it. Make your mother proud by being yourself, not by being her. The girl hugged her fiercely, and Eliza felt the cycle continuing, each generation fighting their own battles, learning their own lessons, building on what came before while forging their own path. Rourke's second stroke came in the night, quick and massive. He was gone before morning, slipping away in his sleep with Eliza beside him. She woke to find him cold and still, his hand still clasping hers. The grief was enormous, crushing, a weight that made breathing difficult. They'd had 47 years together, which was more than most people got, more than they'd had any right to expect. But it wasn't enough. It would never have been enough. The funeral was huge. The entire valley turned out, plus people from Denver and beyond. Stories were told, tears shed, the life of a complicated man honored and remembered. Eliza sat through it dry-eyed and numb, unable to fully process that he was actually gone. Hope held her hand. "Tell me it gets easier." "I don't think it does," Eliza admitted. "I think you just learn to carry it." "That's not comforting." "It's honest." The house felt impossibly empty afterward. Eliza had been alone before Rourke, before the children. She'd known isolation intimately. But this was different. This was the absence of someone who should have been there, an empty space shaped like the person who'd filled it. She wandered through the house, touching things. His favorite chair, his hat on the hook, the rifle he'd used to defend them from wolves and men. Everything saturated with memory. Thomas moved in for a while, worried about leaving her alone. But Eliza sent him away gently. "I survived alone before," she said. "I can do it again." "That doesn't mean you should." "Maybe not. But I need to figure out who I am without him, and I can't do that with you hovering like I'm made of glass." She spent that winter alone, really alone for the first time in decades. And in the solitude, she found something unexpected. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. Rourke was gone, but everything they'd built remained. The ranch, the family, the community, the legacy of fighting for what was right, even when the odds were terrible. She'd been shaped by their marriage, by his stubbornness and strength and capacity for change. But she'd also shaped him, taught him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that partnership meant more than just division of labor. They'd saved each other. That was the truth underneath everything else. Two broken people who'd found each other in desperation and built something extraordinary from nothing but need and will and the refusal to give up. Spring came, as it always did. Eliza was 73 and had no intention of dying anytime soon. There was too much left to do, grandchildren to watch grow, great-grandchildren to spoil, a valley to see prosper. She started writing, not a memoir exactly, but reflections on life and survival and what it meant to choose partnership over isolation.
This story was
About learning
posted
to
on the
trust
channel
when
west
trust
of
had been
Betrayal.
betrayed.
Please
About
do not
finding love in
repost
the
it in
aftermath
any
of
form.
necessity. About building something that lasted. Sarah published it as a series of essays in various journals. They found an audience, women mostly, but not exclusively. People who were trying to figure out how to survive circumstances that felt impossible, who needed to know that survival was the beginning, not the end. The letters came again, and Eliza answered them all. Shared what she'd learned, offered what comfort she could. She'd survived the frontier, survived violence and loss and the slow erosion of time. If that experience could help someone else, then maybe it had meant something beyond just her own life. One afternoon, sorting through Rourke's things, she found a letter he'd written but never sent. It was addressed to her, dated from early in their marriage. "Dear Eliza," it began. "I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to give you this, but I need to write it down while I still remember what it felt like before you. I was dying before you said yes. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I'd given up on everything except revenge, had accepted that my life would be short and brutal and ultimately meaningless. And then you appeared in your freezing soddy, too proud to admit how desperate you were, and offered me something I'd stopped believing existed, a future. I don't know if this arrangement of ours will become something real, but I hope it does. Because for the first time in years, I want to live instead of just existing. Thank you for that. For everything. Even if it all falls apart tomorrow, thank you for reminding me what hope feels like." Eliza wept reading it, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. He'd known. Even then, when they were still strangers, he'd known what they were building was bigger than survival. She kept the letter, read it when the loneliness got too heavy. It helped, knowing that their love had been real from the beginning, even when they'd been too scared or stubborn to name it. The years passed. Eliza grew older, slower, more fragile. The twins took over the ranch completely, managed it with competence that would have made their father proud. Hope became a judge, the first woman judge in the territory. Grace's paintings hung in the Smithsonian. Thomas's clinic expanded into a proper hospital serving the entire valley. They'd all succeeded beyond anything Eliza and Rourke had dared imagine. On her 80th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Eliza looked around the house they'd built and felt complete. This was what they'd fought for. Not just survival, not just justice, but this, a family that knew how to love fiercely, fight honestly, and build something that lasted. Young Eliza, now a successful engineer designing bridges in San Francisco, gave a toast. To my grandmother, she said, raising her glass, who taught me that being scared doesn't mean being weak, that marriage should be partnership, not ownership, that fighting for what's right is always worth it, even when the odds are terrible, and that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. Everyone drank, and Eliza felt tears on her face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gratitude of having lived long enough to see the impact of their choices ripple outward. That night, alone in the house again, she sat on the porch where she'd spent so many evenings with Rourke. The valley spread below, lights twinkling from homes and businesses and lives. All of it built on the foundation they'd helped lay. She thought about the scared woman in the Saudi, the one who'd said yes to a stranger because she had no other options. Thought about how that single desperate choice had led here, to this porch, this life, this legacy. We did good, she said to the empty night, to Rourke's ghost, to the memory of everything they'd built together. Didn't we? The wind whispered through the pines, and she chose to hear it as agreement. Eliza Callahan died quietly in her sleep at 84, in the house she'd built with Rourke, surrounded by the life they'd created from nothing but desperation and will. Her children found her in the morning, peaceful and still, a letter in her hand. It was addressed to all of them, written in her careful teacher's script. My darlings, it read, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't grieve too long. I lived longer and fuller than I had any right to expect. I got to see you all grow into extraordinary people, got to watch my grandchildren and great-grandchildren carry forward the values your father and I tried to instill. That's more than enough for any lifetime. What I want you to remember is this. We were never heroes. We were just two desperate people who refused to accept that desperation meant powerless. We fought for what we believed in, built something that lasted, and loved each other through all of it. That's what I want you to carry forward, not the specifics of our story, but the lesson underneath it. That ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that survival is the beginning, not the end, that love and partnership can transform everything, build your own lives, fight your own battles, make your own mistakes. But do it with intention, with courage, with the understanding that the choices you make matter. And know that your father and I will be proud of you, whatever you choose. We're proud of you now, proud of the people you've become, proud to have been part of making you who you are. Live well, love fiercely, fight for what's right. And remember that even when it seems impossible, even when the odds are terrible and success seems like a fantasy, it's worth trying, always worth trying. With all my love, Mama. They buried her next to Rourke on the hill overlooking the valley they'd fought to protect. The headstone was simple. Eliza Thornfield Callahan, 1847
This
to
story was
1931.
posted on the
She
channel
refused to
west
give
of
up.
Betrayal.
The valley
Please do not
continued, as
repost
valleys
it
do.
in any form.
The ranch prospered under new management. The school taught new generations. The hospital saved lives. The community grew and changed and adapted. But the story remained, passed down through families, taught in schools, remembered by those who understood that their prosperity was built on the courage of people who'd refused to accept that impossible meant inevitable. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, maybe Eliza and Rourke found each other again. Started over with the wisdom of age and the fire of youth. Built something new in the next world, just as they'd done in this one. Or maybe there was nothing after, just the legacy they'd left behind. The children who carried their values forward, the community they'd helped build, the story that reminded people that ordinary courage could change the world. Either way, they'd lived, really lived, not just survived. They'd loved when it would have been easier to stay isolated. They'd fought when surrender would have been safer. They'd built when destruction would have been simpler, and in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Not that they'd been perfect or heroic or special, just that they'd tried. And trying, it turned out, was enough. It was always enough.